She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air penetrate her, reminding her that every moment of life is a choice. The young man recently said he would arrive soon, but the lady had already been waiting for a long time, and she really hoped that nothing would happen. There was an abandoned carriage at a fork in the mountain road, and the young man recently asked Julia to wait for him there to meet him and come to pick her up. Shortly before, the young gentleman gifted the girl the best silk cloak in the country, and she believed that Basil would really come. He gently hugged the girl and cheerfully replied that he would definitely come back for his beloved Julia, because he loved her very much. The young man rested his head on the girl's shoulder and admitted that she was dearer to him than anything else in the world, dearer than his family and even dearer than his home. The knights rode along a path covered in fine snow, on whose edges grew heavily frosted trees with sharp branches that seemed to pierce the sky. The man walking ahead said the team must be cold and that the snowstorm doesn't cease. And Lord Carus himself recently said that they would wait a few more days and then pack up and leave. The young man stopped and asked everyone to be quiet, saying they had almost reached the place. The man said, "The master has been saying these words from the beginning," but the young man once again ordered him to be silent. He heard a voice calling the commander and telling him that there was someone else here, and that these people were definitely alive. Surviving in such cold was quite troublesome, and many were sure they would only find corpses on the snowy path. The gentleman got off his swift steed and decided to go resolve the situation himself. With every moment that passed, the wait became more and more painful, until finally he saw Julia lying unconscious in the carriage. She looked so fragile, covered with a white blanket, as if the snow was trying to protect her from the cold. The girl was in the carriage. The young man understood it would take him half a day to reach the nearest settlement, but there were thieves nearby, and they were quite skilled. The lord asked to capture only one, and all the others had to be killed so that no one would dare speak of what happened. The knights advanced, and after a while they saw 3 people quickly fleeing the attack. Realizing they had been noticed, the thieves were defeated by the knights' skillful blows, and in a couple of seconds, their lifeless bodies lay upon the white snow. The gentleman carefully lifted Julia into his arms. Her body was light, and her warm cheeks touched his clothes. He knew he couldn't stay here, and had to reach the estate and call a doctor. They managed to catch up with one of the people, and one of the thieves was interested in who these people were. The young man removed his hood and introduced himself as Carus Lancia, His Majesty the Emperor's second knight, and commander of the Libidane Order. It seems this woman was his target, but the Imperial army managed to reach her faster than the bandits. Carus said that the girl was an orphan and was under the protection of the Marquis, but for some reason seduced the young master and promised to marry him, and they planned to flee together. The gentleman understood that he needed to deal with this woman and did not want to hear anything else, ordering the last thief to be killed. The knight warned that they would dispose of all bodies by throwing them off the cliff, but they kept a completely unknown girl found in the carriage. Carus did not answer this question and only said that it was time for the knights to go to a rest stop. They decided to go down the snowy hills as quickly as possible, while the stragglers planned to go on their own. After a while, the girl lay on a warm and cozy bed, surrounded by affection and attention. The knights of the Imperial army were close to her. The doctor told them she could die like this, and the girl's heart was beating too slowly. The gentleman decided to leave the girl here and give the doctor some gold coins. They hurried here through the snowstorm, but could not stay due to the strange woman found on the road. His companions supposed they would stay to rest, but the gentleman thought differently and decided to inspect the suitcase that was in the carriage. The suitcase contained a token and luggage, and there was no spare clothing or sleeping bag. And the young man did not find money either. The ring on the girl's finger looked dirty but expensive, and maybe the young master mentioned by the bandit was connected to this. Julia must have waited all night in the cold, hoping her lover would come, until she fell asleep from the terrible cold. The man ran to call the doctor, but the next second the girl, whose body was finally warm, woke up from her sleep. The girl opened her eyes and began to cough heavily because her throat hurt terribly from the cold. Carus said he found a girl frozen to death near a fork, where 3 assassins were looking for her. His men took care of it, but there is no guarantee that they won't return again. These assassins were hired by the Viceroy of Marquis Majorama, and this is the only thing the young man learned before his death. The young man said that tomorrow morning they would leave early, and before that time, the the girl needed to recover if she wanted to be under his protection. Suddenly, the lady turned to the young gentleman, calling him Mr. Karis, and at that moment the young man opened his eyes in surprise. The gentleman knew for certain that he had not told the stranger his name, but for some reason, the girl still knew it. Tears appeared in the beautiful girl's eyes, and she asked if the young master believed in a real curse. Karis never believed in superstitions and myths, but the girl said she was cursed with immortality. And 9 times she thought she had died, but then always came back to life until today, where people always say the same thing. She already knew that the young man would tell her how they found her frozen near a mountain fork, and that 3 assassins were looking for her. They say she was a poor commoner who was abandoned by her lover, and this girl is probably really crazy. But for some reason, the stranger insisted that if things continued like this, all his people would be in great danger on the brink of death. This girl was named Julia, and she was once cursed and realized that her second life ended in vain. After being rescued by Karis, Julia returned to Marquis Majorana, and the first thing she did was ask her lover, why did he leave her if he loved her, and made her wait in the cold all night without even seeing each other. Julia cried and tried to understand why her boyfriend said he loved her, and then acted so treacherously. Basil's excuse was stupid and obvious, but Julia didn't want to believe his blatant lie. However, on the way back, Julia was killed by the Marquis' hyena, and this became the second death. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Karis had saved her from death in that same snowstorm. In her third life, Julia decided to live alone, but the Majorama clan did not forget about her at all. In her fourth life, Julia decided to take revenge, but failed, and so on in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and the longer she lived, the more her hatred intensified. The girl admitted that she had already lived like this 8 times, and that every attempt to be happy ended in failure. She perfectly understood that the Lord probably didn't believe her, but admitted that he continued to save her every time. And that's why she told him this story. The young man said he wanted it himself, and his people found the girl in very bad, unconscious condition. Therefore, Julia shared with the young man to save the knights, and before they completely left the mountains, there would be 2 more attacks. The first is in the silver poplar forest on the mountainside. There is another at the entrance to the traveler's village at the beginning of the mountain ridge, and it can be avoided by taking the valley road. Karis wanted to ask her just one question, whether the girl tried to save his people in past lives. The lady fell silent in response, and the young man turned around and said they would leave together at midnight, and that the girl would surely accompany them. But if Julia lied, the 10th life will find her in return, and she herself will understand who she is dealing with. The gentleman said they would take a side road, and local herbalists would show them the right way. And they were actually going to leave in the middle of the night. Julia asked us to take her along a secret mountain path that is not visible from the main road. If someone passes by and asks us, the locals only have to say they didn't see anyone. The girl was ready to leave, but suddenly heard a man wanted to talk to her. It was a knight from a detachment called Babislav. He asked her if the girl knew how to saddle a horse, and if she wanted to ride with him. He placed his hand on the girl's face, which was incredibly hot, and said he would immediately bring a doctor. But Julia insisted she was completely fine. Everyone would leave soon, and she didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. The man said, "You cannot see the approaching snowstorm because the weather has completely worsened." She asked the man not to worry because the bad weather would end soon. But the man was sure that the girl had no way of knowing and put his warm gloves on her hands. The lady looked at the gloves and remembered the gentleman's question if she had tried to save his people in past lives. In past lives, Karis's people always died and only he survived, and Julia never tried to save them. But now, having seen a kind gesture from a complete stranger, she believed there were still kind people in the world. The squadron of knights stopped at the edge of the cliff and saw that hundreds of assassins were already waiting for them below. The young men were very relieved, because they would have had big trouble if the mercenaries attacked them where they were. They say suspicious people are also controlling the entrance to the village, and you will probably have to try hard to get there. The Lord remembered the girl's words that the first attack awaited them in the silver forest, and the second at the entrance to the village at the mouth of the mountain range. One of the knights asked the Lord what they should do now, because in such bad weather it is too dangerous to detour around the whole village. The man said, as Julia herself recently said, that the long snowstorm would end soon. And the next second, the knights couldn't believe their own eyes, seeing how the dark, cloudy sky had just cleared up right in front of them, illuminating it with the sun's rays. The Lord told Julia he wanted to give her another chance to tell the truth, and the lady admitted that she was not a spy. The knights asked for proof. The girl said that the spring rains would arrive in a week, a short rain during the day. And at night, and after the rain, the young army would hold a demonstration in front of the palace. The gentleman wanted to know who ordered the people to attack them, and Julia agreed to tell everything if he trusted her. She suggested that Karis probably knew the answer and said that the main accomplice was the Empress of Nebora. Upon hearing this information, Karis confidently declared that Julia Art would henceforth go with him. A week later it started raining, with short showers during the day and heavy downpours at night. The knights arrived at the checkpoint of the capital of the Kingdom of Ortega and informed the guard that they had arrived through the Titania Mountains. The guard wondered if they had crossed the mountain range in that weather and asked the guests to come in, pointing out that the hotel was nearby, in the first lane. As Julia said, they crossed the ridge, so they were immediately allowed to pass. And Ortega was initially an open field. Babislav didn't know what to answer, because everything happened exactly as Julia said. The girl invited the man to have milk with honey and alcohol, and thanked him for his incredible work. She looked at Karis, sitting on his horse in the rain, and asked if he wanted a hot drink. The girl looked at him with eyes full of affection and kindness, and was still waiting for an answer. The bloodless admiral named Karis Lancella was the second knight of the Great Bacon Empire. He came here by order of the emperor to explore the southern fleet, stationed for protection, since the empire's fleet was fighting pirates, and the emperor could not stand idly by. However, on the way Karis lost all his people, and in search of a place had to return to his native Bacon. But this time, everything will be different, because Julia will give him additional information. She decided to force the young man to trust her, and only then try to gain his power. The girl told Karis that the southern imperial fleet was already on the same side as the pirates, and that the young master needed this information. A lot of money arrived at the port of Ortega, and this is about pirate funds that the southern fleet received in exchange for turning a blind eye to pirate activities. This is being done by someone who is not Marquis Mayoram himself, about whom no one could have thought such a thing, because he is the true embodiment of Ortega, with the royal palace, thanks to numerous families, and their intertwined interests. Julia cannot destroy the palace of Ortega alone. Julia knew she had to trap Karis, and that they would have to cut off Majoram's head. The young man asked the girl not to smile like that, saying he knew similar women, those who chose life on the edge of a knife. People who smile experience happiness and trouble, and these smiles only cause tension in others. And if Majoram is really her enemy, why then does she cling to revenge every time she is reborn solely because of her persistent obsession with her former lover? Julia assured that Majoram meant nothing to her anymore, and she just wanted to make sure that nothing remained for her in the land where he breathes. The girl wanted Majoram's entire mouth to be completely erased, that dreams be thrown into the sewer, because that is how true revenge works. The young man ordered Babislav to take the others to the hotel, while the neighbors had already gathered near the estate gates. They tried to defend their interests and demanded independence for the lands belonging to the kingdom. The gentleman wondered if after the rain there would be a demonstration by the Liberation Army, the reason why the locals rebelled so much. The young man went out to the pawn shop and was greeted by his acquaintance Maxwell, whom he hadn't seen for many years. It has been 10 years since he became an Ortega neighbor, and he knows how many adventures the royal family has had, and how many illegitimate children he has had. He wanted to know everything the young man could say about Julia, but for some reason, that name did not appear in any of the records. Maxwell found similar information. There were rumors about an orphan living under the protection of a marquis who tried to escape by seducing a young master. Then the marquis hired assassins, but she suddenly disappeared with them. And he, the gentleman, also knew this information. Maxwell told another story about a lady from the Southport orphanage who was a gifted girl who entered the best academy at the age of 16 with the support of Majoram. And she was so smart that she placed second in the 4 years of her studies. The marquis found out that she was having an affair with the heir and stopped maintaining the orphanage. And in the end, the poor director couldn't stand it and sold the children to the ship. After this, they tried to court Julia Ort with a worker, which is why she ran away. And this story was incredibly strange. The gentleman asked if the young man had ever worked as a fortune teller, prophet, or swindler because these professions suited him well. Karis thought he should provide at least some information, but even a self-proclaimed information broker receives it slower than a real swindler. That evening, the door was knocked on, and a new guest who had just arrived entered the dining room. Karis sat down at the table and told the girl that dinner had been ready for a long time, and it was slowly getting cold, so it was worth starting to eat. The lady was surprised what all this meant, but Karis said they owed their lives to the girl, and that they shouldn't worry so much. Julia admitted that she should not go with the knights, because Mahoram will continue to send assassins, which will obviously interfere with their mission. The Bry Order is awarded to those who get the top places in the final exam, and if it is awarded to a commoner, he can enter the royal palace. A palace maid is an honorary position, and if Julia receives the order, she will work in the palace. Karis was sure that since it was a royal palace, security would be guaranteed there, and it would be easy to watch the girl. He asked why Julia wanted to become a maid, because there must have been easier ways to stab Majorana in the back. But the lady was sure that it was worth hitting the royal family with her hands, and Mahoram deserved it like no one else. The day of the exam arrived, and Julia, excited, stood in front of the walls of the educational institution she was about to enter right now. Suddenly, one of the knights approached her and asked the girl, "The main thing is not to get nervous because this is just a test. And if you let the event take its course, then everything will be fine." The man encouraged Julia that she would definitely pass the exam, and he himself was probably worried, although he was not the one taking the exam. After a while, Guglia heard the director's words of pardon, who said that at the end of the year, Lady Christine Majoram should take first place. She also heard that Julia won the main spot in the exam, pushing the young daughter of the Marquis to second place. And this way, she could hurt her pride, because a commoner would have nothing to gain from such a victory. The director said nothing of the sort would be done, and that the Marquis was a man of enormous wealth. The Mayoram family provided great support to the shelter, and everyone knew it very well. The director had made it clear, in advance, that Christine Mayoram's name should be written on the certificate of honor. And then Julia gave the title to the best student of the academy, Christine, for 4 years in a row. Julia asked the man to wait in front of the office and not leave, thanking him for his concern. During the exam, there was complete silence, and the students sat in a large hall, carefully studying the questions on the tickets. Julia tried hard to answer all the questions correctly, but she knew very well that Christine probably should take first place. Part of the exam was passed quite quickly, and the teacher, walking through the class, said that approximately half the time remained to complete all the tasks. Julia carefully reread her notes and signed every word she wrote. The girl knew she had done an excellent job on the exam, so she was not in the least worried about the correctness of the tasks she completed. After the exam, she decided to go out for some fresh air, but she couldn't stay alone with her thoughts. After all, right behind her was Christine herself, to whom victory was guaranteed. The girl asked if Julia had really come here to take her final exam. She was sure that her parents had decided everything, so she did not doubt the skills she lacked, but rather her successful victory. She asked if Julia really dared to write the assignment on her own, and urgently wanted to clarify this issue. Suddenly, Julia burst out laughing when Christine started asking questions about the exam she had completed. Julia approached the girl and admitted that if she weren't crazy, she would really start using Christine's name again. Christine finally understood that Julia did not agree with the persuasion, and even her father would not help her with this. Christine clenched her fists in anger as Julia silently left the unpleasant company of such a negative person. Julia remembered that there was a time when she was really jealous of Christine, but now everything was completely different. Christina was the only daughter of the most famous family in the kingdom, a beauty who was madly loved by the terrible Marquis. But to protect this girl's honor, Julia Horta had to sacrifice herself. Julia was greeted by a knight who asked her how she passed the test, and if the girl got first place. Suddenly, the young man who saw Julia couldn't believe what he saw. The girl had just got into someone else's carriage. This evening, the gentleman said that rumors were running on the street that Basil Mayoram would soon marry the king's daughter. A few days after the test, the amount of rumors increased significantly, all in order to know if the news of her survival was true. He said that not only hyenas wander around, but they are like individual mercenaries of Basil. And the best student will be announced tomorrow at the graduation ceremony. And after that, Julia will go to the palace so as not to be a burden to the young master anymore. The young man considered such a burden doubtful, and Julia admitted that she didn't know such a serious gentleman could joke. Karis asked if the girl received the medal, whose maid she intended to become, and the lady admitted that she was going to LR, whom she hated the Mayorams more than anyone in the palace of Ortega. Karis didn't immediately understand who she was talking about, and the girl actually meant the second prince, Levis Ortega. Levis Ortega was a member of the royal family who hated and despised the Mayoram family the most. Julia told this to the young gentleman, and this was the first time he had heard such information. He asked why the prince hated them, and it turned out that the biological mother of the second prince was the king's own mistress. To the Marquis, the son of his mistress is nothing more than an annoying insect, and since childhood, he openly ignores the prince. So Levis pays betrayal with contempt. The gentleman wanted to know how influential this prince was, and if this would be enough to protect her from Mahoram's attack. But Julia had a completely different plan, and was sure that they themselves had to increase their influence. In the ceremony hall, a man announced that this year the second Prince Levis would attend the graduation ceremony, and he would like to deliver a solemn speech. His Highness the Prince himself came out of the closet before the present students, and, as everyone said about him, he was indeed incredibly handsome and attractive. Suddenly, the prince felt his ears starting to turn red, and clearly someone was gossiping about him. The director of the educational institution announced this year's top student, naming the name Julia Art. The girls were about to officially present the Bry order, asking Julia Art to come up on stage. And all the students did not expect to hear that the best student would not be Christine. Julia solemnly stepped onto the stage, and the prince said that, as a representative of the Ortega royal family, he wanted to give a gift to the best student and that she should raise her head and express her wishes. The girl loudly declared that she would like to become a maid to His Majesty, Prince Levis, and this is her official statement. The students did not expect to learn that Julia wanted to become a court maid, and at that moment, the major himself rushed towards her. The prince directed his attention to Basil, and if you think about it, this is the same commoner who was in a relationship with him. But the lady was sure that the prince would not regret taking her as a maid. As soon as he was defeated, the young man asked if the girl was really going to ditch him, only to then insult and ridicule him. Prince Levis had just agreed to fulfill the best student's conditions, and, from that moment on, Julia Art officially became his personal maid. Perhaps Julia is the most famous commoner in Ortega, despite the fact that she was used and abandoned by the Marquis of one of the noble families. But she found strength in herself and overcame all difficulties, becoming a butler's maid on her own. After the solemn announcement, Basil approached Julia and told her that he had been looking for a girl for a long time, but that she did not come to him. He wanted to know why the girl was angry, because she should listen to him, and he tried to communicate with her that day, even though his father was watching him. As soon as Basil approached Julia, many people gathered around them, and everyone seemed to laugh at what was happening. Julia menacingly said, Basil said he loved her and offered to run away together. Then he sent assassins, but now that she is alive and well again, he is again trying to get her attention. Julia deliberately pronounced every word loudly, so that everyone around her could hear that Basil was brazenly trying to kill her. Having a mistress alive with him, he began to indignantly say that the girl was lying, and in no case needed to kill her. Christine approached them and asked her brother what he was doing here, having a verbal altercation with this girl. She asked Julia to stop too, and was sure that everyone would hear her words. Julia tore the badge of the best student from her chest and asked if this was what the girl wanted, and even attended the graduation ceremony. After all, she thought that Christine would cry in the mansion over losing first place. Because her pride was hurt, Majoram asked Julia in surprise what was wrong with her, and it was as if she had become a different person. Without her kindness and innocence, Julia asked if the young man really wanted her to come back, in which case she should die. Trapped alone in the snowy mountains, feeling her hands and feet slowly freezing in the despair that no one would come when faced with death at the hands of real assassins. And surely then, the young man will find out if this pitiful commoner will forgive her precious master. Basil only now realized that he had acted in a completely wrong way, and big tears of despair burst from his voice over the asphalt, but he could no longer correct anything. On the same day, the girl opened a new gift box, which contained a luxurious suit donated by Prince Levis. He sent luxurious clothes, specifically for Julia to wear tomorrow, and go to the palace on her first day of work. The gentleman invited the girl to LR. With him, and today's spectacle probably reached the marquis, but Julia was sure that he would not act directly. The young man was disappointed not to have immediately caught these hyenas and hand them over to the young lady. And truly, her revenge would end there once and for all. The girl noticed that the young master was still worried, and she was right. Karis of Lance is very different from what other people say about him. No one had ever seen him bleed on the battlefield. That's why people called him the Bloodless Admiral. And they also said that Karis had an icy heart. He cannot prevent the death of his subordinates, which is why he chose the path of an avenger. And he was a person who could always be relied upon and who treated his dears with warmth. But there was one more person whom Julia also needed to find in the palace. And it was a girl. After Julia became the top student, Christine came home incredibly angry because she couldn't afford to be worse than Julia. The girl threw a vase with roses and shouted. Everything happened because of her mom and dad, because she had an incredible desire to receive the order. The father tried to calm his daughter, but she was indignant that Majoram spoke to Julia in front of everyone and be treated like a shameless nobleman flirting with a commoner. Christine was very nervous, shouting and hitting everything she had at hand, while her father tried to calm her down and prove to her that people gossiping about that simpleton would soon forget everything, and they would be back on her side. Christine was sure that she would never forget this, but at that moment, her mother entered and told her there was no point in crying and making others cry over what had already happened. Mother said that, in her opinion, the ideal couple is the bastard prince and a commoner servant. And current, after passing the exam, Julia sat down with Mr. Ivabaslov, who friendly hugged the girl, and told her that he would miss her very much. The young man asked when the royal carriage would arrive, but the girl did not know the exact time. Suddenly, they heard a voice announcing a new order from His Highness, from the second Prince Levis Ortega. In front of the entrance was a messenger who read the news that Julia Art would prepare to enter the palace as His Highness's personal maid. Julia said it was time to go, but that she should definitely go down alone, and that the young men should stay here. The gentleman admitted that if the girl needed anything, she could always find Maxwell and contact him through him, and he would help her at any time of the day or night. Julia looked at the young man with a friendly look and promised him that she would definitely do this, thanking young Lord Karas for his attention and responsibility, and for maintaining complete safety during the journey. While driving through green hills and beautiful gardens, she felt her excitement gradually give way to determination. Deep down, Julia knew that this experience might not be just a temporary retreat, but an opportunity. When Julia entered the spacious castle hall, her day was just beginning, and unknown adventures awaited her. Julia was greeted by the butler, who told her that Prince Levis was not here today, and that initially there was only one personal maid. But now that the girl had arrived, there were two. The butler admitted that it is a bit difficult with one personal maid, but she is a very good person. She simply identifies very clearly what she likes and what she doesn't. Palace maids are representatives of the royal family, and maids generally bow politely when meeting a personal maid. But since Julia is also a commoner, they don't know what to do. The maids whispered whether they should bow to the girl, as well as to Coco, the youngest daughter of the count's family. But if the lady would feel belittled, they looked at her with curiosity, and gathering all their courage, she approached them. Julia greeted the maids, and now they understood nothing what to do, but a red-haired lady came to their aid, who told them they should either wear a skirt or nod their head as a greeting, but under no circumstances kneel or bow like a prince. It was Cordelia Hinch. She asked the maids to greet the guests the same way they greet her, and it is really very difficult to understand. Do the maids really think that the guest is so narrow-minded that she would easily take offense at a simple greeting? Julia said her name and said she was very happy to meet Cordelia, whom everyone calls Coco. Coco said that Prince Levis doesn't like his maids to follow him, so unless absolutely necessary, you can do whatever you want in your free time. Suddenly, an unknown man approached the girls and told them that he had arrived from the inner palace, and he wanted to know who the new maid was. Julia Art stepped forward and introduced herself as the new maid of His Highness, the second prince, and the man asked her to follow him to check her background before she could work in the palace. Julia was perplexed about what kind of background we were talking about, because she was personally appointed by His Highness the Prince. The man was outraged that the lady talked too much, because a thorough check is a responsible matter to know if a commoner is suitable for the role of a family maid. Royal. Therefore, the butler asked the girl to stop talking nonsense and go for a medical examination. And Coco was also surprised by this news. She asked if someone was really going to examine her body, but the man insisted that not everything was like that. Lady Coco said that the palace representatives took the royal maid and checked her like a criminal. Cordelia Hinch was the only daughter of a count and personal maid to the second prince, Levis Ortega, but she had another nickname, and everyone called her Coco, the devil's servant. And this nickname was completely justified. The butler asked how the lady dared to talk about checking a new guest. Coco was indignant. Maybe the butler should examine her, and if she has an unholy mark on her body, she is likely to be a thief who came to harm the prince. Julia insisted that she was fine and that they were just checking her. The first virtue a royal maid must have is loyalty, and the second is dignity. A maid shares her life with the royal family and is responsible for herself, fulfilling orders and special assignments. Since Julia is now close to His Highness Prince Levis, she is obliged to share and protect his honor. And Coco admitted that she could not stand seeing His Highness's maid lose her dignity before her eyes. The responsible maid asked Coco not to get so angry so that the new guest would feel comfortable. If everything goes well, Julia will become the maid of His Highness, the second prince, so she will be treated well. Coco asked to do this in front of her, because she couldn't allow an innocent person to be accused of crimes. The maid agreed to do the check together, so that Lady Coco would not be indignant. The girls entered a separate room, and the head maid noticed that Julia had a long neck and good posture, and that the girl was elegant and incredibly beautiful. Coco, with an angry expression on her face, told Julia not to examine her like that because she was just a servant, not His Highness's mistress. The head maid promised to fulfill all the conditions Lady Coco stated, so that she would not worry in any way. The lady said that the maid Julia did a good job, and there were no problems with the background check or the medical examination. After fulfilling her obligations, Coco asked Julia to listen to her carefully. She pointed her finger at the girl and asked her to go home, which incredibly surprised the young woman. Julia said she had nowhere to go because she had no home or family, and Coco was surprised that the girl was staying in the palace now. Coco stated that as a royal maid, Julia would have no problem getting food and lodging wherever she went. She wondered why the lady was trying so hard to stay in the palace and probably wouldn't talk like that again after her first punishment. And Julia said she doesn't want to be killed because the people hired by Marquis Mayoram are looking for her life, and there is no place in the kingdom of Ortega where his influence is not. Coco replied, "It's a pity that the girl chose such a man, but he is definitely not a bad person." She asked the maids to show the new maid her room and decided to rest. One of the maids took the luggage of the maid Julia and followed the new guest to her room. The maid asked the girl not to be offended, but decided to tell her worriedly, because she feared something might happen to Julia. Julia asked when she had problems with the treatment, since Lady Coco had recently intervened and solved everything. Julia admitted that she liked Coco very much, and the maid felt incredibly relieved. She knew she had a lot of difficult work ahead, but she tried not to lose faith in herself. Julia decided to go to the palace for a reason, and her soul warmed up with the girl's words, who asked her to find the second prince in the palace as soon as she was reborn. Again, therefore, Julia stood near the window with an expression of satisfaction on her face, thinking that she had finally met Coco again. The young gentleman was sitting in his office, thinking about what had recently happened to him and to his squadron. He had heard of legends, magic, and myths of the Bacon Empire, but he considered it a complete lie. The young man could not stop thinking that the lady had discovered his name, and, if her words were true, the Bacon fleet was actually distributing pirate money. As soon as the young man had time to think about it, someone called him by his name again, without giving him a chance to be alone. It was a young man who was looking for information, and that night he flew into the Lord's chambers, shouting that everything was true. He said that pirate gold coins were actually unloaded onto the Bacon fleet and delivered at the port, and Julia's words were confirmed again. Karis wondered if in this situation they could turn her into an ally, regardless of the methods to obtain information. The young man said they say the money is laundered by nobles, and many people are involved in this. And the Empire's fleet is also involved in this. That all this time it was simply following the pirates' orders. But no proof could be found, as these people hide carefully. And no one provides proof. And if they try to interrogate a noble on the other side, a war might start. The angry gentleman stood up from his seat, and, hitting the table with his hand, declared that they should attack the southern fleet. He said he would make an alarm with his people, and the young man asked to go to the palace of Ortega and help Julia with all their might. The gentleman also asked not to ask for details and to support the girl in whatever she wants. Be it objects or people, it doesn't matter at all. He perfectly understood that Julia Art had a lot of experience and had to make sure they were willing to do whatever she wanted for her. In a past life, Julia already knew Lady Coco, and one day, standing on the balcony, she asked her to come with her when the girl was reborn again. Then, Julia insisted that she already had a goal and had no time for maid games. And Coco was sure that the Bry medal originally belonged to Julia, which is why she could use her skills to pass the test. A palace maid is a servant who manages the royal family, and this position is closer to power than any other, but obviously not conspicuous. She insisted that she could not involve Coco in her revenge, but her friend was sure that a lady should not try to do everything herself. After all, she is not the only one in this country who considers the Marquis a true enemy. And Coco and the prince also want revenge. That day she asked to go to the palace and promised to help, but the girl understood that when she was reborn again, Coco would remember her already. But Coco told her friend not to worry about it, because she would tell her a very simple way to gain favor in her new life. Coco whispered something quietly into Julia's ear, and it was one of her little secrets. In fact, Julia really liked Coco in her past life, and she and the girl had a lot in common. They communicated so well that Julia didn't care if she had forgotten their past relationship, or if she still remembered everything. Julia's first day of work started quite strangely, and she woke up in a terrible state of deterioration after having slept too much on her first day of work. The maids were already preparing food in the kitchen, and were very surprised when Julia came to work. She smiled and greeted the maids, wishing them a good day and good morning. The maids were surprised that Lady Julia woke up too early, because Lady Coco and His Highness usually have breakfast in the afternoon. Coco's habit of waking up late remained the same, and in this case, Julia decided to eat first. The girl heard a voice behind her asking if the maid Julia was there. The young man with excited eyes said, "His Highness Prince Levis is looking for a new maid." And also Basilio from the Mayorama Marquis family arrived at the palace, and was also here today. The meeting of the two young men was very unexpected, and each of them had a special relationship with each other. Julia approached them and bowed to His Highness Prince Levis. With great joy, he raised his hand and greeted the new maid Julia, calling her by name. The young man said that his guest was here, and that he had already invited her to have breakfast together, considering it a great idea. Suddenly, Basil asked Julia to talk, explaining to the prince that he needed to talk about something with his beloved, so the young man should let her be for a while. The prince was surprised since the lady became his mistress, because for a long time she had the status of his ex-girlfriend. The young man admitted that he regretted it very much when he left immediately after the ceremony, because he really wanted to see how Majorama was humiliated in front of so many people. Therefore, if the young man wants to talk to Julia this time, he must do it only in front of the prince, because he is in his house, where the girl is a maid, and as the owner he has every right. Julia admitted that, firstly, she had no idea what kind of business the Mayoram heir could have with her, because their relationship ended a long time ago. The prince insisted that Julia was probably angry, and asked not to talk about everything on the street, but to do it in a more private setting. Julia withdrew her hand and said, "She is a close maid to His Highness, the second prince, so the master must make an appointment, complying with all rules and procedures." Basil did not expect Julia to be so rude to him, and excitedly took her hand away. The prince said that he was in a bad mood this morning due to the imminent royal tournament, but it seemed he had patience only for the sake of this moment. Julia apologized, because the prince's morning was interrupted, and promised to do her best to make the gentleman leave, and not bother anyone else. The prince was sure that the three of them would have fun having breakfast together, but seeing the young man at first glance, he would never return. Miriam asked Julia what she thought about becoming a palace maid, because he knows very well how he and the whole family hate the second prince. Julia confidently stated that this is the reason why the Majorum family hates Prince Levisa. The young man was indignant because the girl kept doing this to him, because his father hired assassins to harm her. Not him, a noble nobleman who fell in love with an orphan commoner, a romantic and kind knight who doesn't care about social status. And Julia was grateful to Ortega. One day, just a single gold coin, gifted by a young man, turned into a light that helped her live all this time. For a long time, Julia considered Mayoram her deity, because he changed her life beyond recognition. But in reality, the young man never loved her. He only stroked his own vanity. Basil said, he even said that he would leave his family and go with the girl. And she did not dare to speak like that. For Julia, it was obvious that in the end, the young man abandoned her and chose his family. And if he really loved her, he would never have done it. His love faded right behind a closed door, and the young man didn't even try to do anything. Basil was sure that Julia did not understand his feelings, but in reality, he loved her incredibly. For Julia, Basil's suffering was exhausting, and the first time she saw such behavior, she felt relief. But now she felt a strong emptiness. In this case, the girl suggested breaking the engagement, because she had heard that Basil would soon get engaged to the princess. And if he was sincere, he could probably do it. The girl admitted that she was sure that nothing would go well for the young man, because all his words were complete lies. Julia was doing important business in the palace, and that day, she wanted to meet the maid Coco. She asked if Julia had finished her duties, and Julia said she had already completed many things. The prince immediately told the head maid that the young man was worried about her unrequited feelings. They watched the conversation the whole time, and the prince said he could not miss such a funny scene. He wondered if the girl wanted to buy herself some new dress, and Coco knew many good clothing stores. The prince was sure it was worth it, because he had to pay the girl so that she would continue to show herself like this. Julia carefully sat down at the table and asked if the prince wanted anything else, because he was in a bad mood this morning due to the royal tournament. The tournament was held at the same time every year, and Julia said that this year she would like to attend the royal tournament for the first time. The royal tournament is an event held annually in the palace and is also a place where members of the royalty and nobles demonstrate their skills. Besides demonstrating skills, this is a great opportunity to assess which princes show leadership qualities and understand which family supports which prince. Coco jumped up from her seat and was indignant that Julia had gone crazy, because she had no idea where she was going. The girl heard that this is a place where royalty and nobles gather to show off their skills, and through private competition, future leaders can reach great heights. Coco was sure that all this was complete nonsense, and their future leaders learned to fight in advance. And it would be imprudent if a commoner looked like she wouldn't join such an event. Julia promised that she would follow the orders silently. If she personally appeared at the tournament, Basil would go crazy and couldn't do anything, and this would be useful for His Highness. The prince asked if Julia was going to the tournament. Then he couldn't protect her, and it wouldn't be appropriate for an adult prince to take a maid everywhere with him. It became known that Christine Mayoram would also be present, and the second prince had just told Julia about it. Julia knew it very well and still agreed to go to the tournament, so the prince decided to pay attention to her request. He asked Coco to calm down, because Julia was the absolute winner of the Bry medal, and the only one whom Christine Mayoram could not defeat. The prince asked the maid not to disappoint him under any circumstances, and wished Julia to win the tournament. Suddenly, someone outside the door announced that things had arrived for Lady Julia, which had just been delivered by a cab driver. In front of the maid's door were several boxes, and they were in a hurry to hang up all the new dresses. Coco, along with the prince and Julia, went out to see what was happening, and the head maid was incredibly indignant. The lady got angry because this was happening, but the maid told her. The owner of the costume shop said that all the things were sent by Lady Julia's patron. Hearing this, Julia guessed that the patron must be Lord Caras Lincia himself. He sent skillfully woven items, not just a dress, but also shoes, gloves, and even a handbag, which means he confirmed that the Imperial fleet was indeed transporting pirate gold. Coco did not understand what kind of patron he was, who could do so much for a common maid, and current from an orphanage. On this sunny day, the prince, along with his maid Julia, decided to go on a trip, and they needed an escort. He asked the girl to walk with him, and also told her to be strong and not doubt herself at all. The lady immediately promised that she would follow him, respectfully bowing her head to him. Julia was worried about Coco, but the prince was sure that everything would be fine with the head maid, and that she just needed to be left alone. Julia thoughtfully looked at the maid's windows and was very worried that Coco really wouldn't come. The topic of this tournament was the essay, and Julia knew that they would be asked to write a New Year's message to the emperor himself. This year marks 20 years since the kingdom of Ortega has been under the patronage of Bacon. Bacon recently stopped its conquest campaigns and focused on internal affairs, and now it wants to confirm the loyalty of its states, because this allows the imperial fleet to sail in its waters, and Bacon will require a New Year's speech expressing loyalty. The young man said that His Majesty would not want to write it himself, as it would hurt his pride, so he wanted to ask the children to write for him. But no matter how beautifully written the New Year's speech is, they will still choose the first prince, or the Marquis of Mayoram. Instead, the prince must write a message addressed to the faction and ignite a fire in the hearts of young nobles who want independence. Ortega is not a colony of the Bacon Empire, but a separate vassal state and, strictly speaking, it looks like a defensive alliance. The prince was sure that the emperor would not be upset by his bold message and would not set Ortega on fire. In this case, he asked the girl to write the essay herself because she had good knowledge. The prince said he would like to see what his maid is capable of, and also heard that Kristen Mayoram always wanted to win first place in the academy. Julia admitted that Kristen Mayoram not only did not win, but her essay was in no way comparable to Julia's. Aristocrats and students, dressed in outfits made of expensive fabrics, gathered at a gala tournament. Discussing the latest news, ladies in luxurious dresses decorated with beads and lace intertwined in a circle of acquaintances, and gentlemen dressed in formal tailcoats and new shoes walked confidently among them. The prince asked Julia to wait here, and the maid respectfully agreed to fulfill his request. The girl noticed that it really looked like a small battlefield, where those present had difficult relationships. It was obvious that the nobles were divided into different factions, and each was in its own company. The largest group gathered around the first prince, followed by the first princess's faction. As for the second prince, we can safely say that there is no faction under His Highness Levis, and, being the son of a concubine, he is not considered heir to the throne. However, Julia knew that the situation would soon change, and at that moment, Christine appeared behind her. She asked what Julia was doing there, as if she didn't expect to see her at the event. Julia said she had arrived here as the second prince's maid, and the girl looked at her friend in surprise. People wondered since when commoners were allowed to appear at the tournament, and if the prince was really cruel enough to just play with Julia, knowing that she would be kicked out anyway. These were the nobles close to the marquis, and they wouldn't survive without the scraps Mayoram threw away. Christine asked Julia to leave this place for her own good, and said she didn't know what the prince himself was thinking. Julia asked what right the lady had to give orders, as she was a servant of His Highness, the second prince, and not a maid of Lady Majora. The young man would be indignant if Julia really thought the status of a palace maid was a great position. She claimed that the girl first seduced Basil, and now she is trying to seduce the prince. Coco approached him and asked him to take his hand away before she broke all the young man's fingers, and looked at him with a threatening gaze. A lady immediately ran towards them and asked Lady Hinch to apologize for her sudden rudeness. Coco only asked the girl to shut up, and she doesn't know that touching a palace maid discredits royal honor. Society began to be indignant, and many were sure that the dirt from under Mayoram's boots could not contradict the prince's attendant. Christine admitted she said it out of concern for Julia, but she fooled everyone and apologized to Lady Hinch. Coco took Julia by the hand and asked her to accompany her, because they needed to find Prince Levis and not get involved in ridiculous quarrels. She took the girl's hands and asked her not to get involved with those people anymore. And Julia knew very well that Coco had always been like this. When Lady Coco saw weak and defenseless children, she simply couldn't pass by and help them. While Christine always believed she was acting fairly, Coco, in Julia's opinion, was a truly just woman who always protected the weak. The girls walked down a luxurious hall, and at that moment, Julia and Coco were greeted by the second prince himself. Coco was very nervous because the prince simply stood and looked away, seeing how his maid was being blatantly insulted. The young man reminded her once again because he said he wouldn't protect her, and moreover, when he found this out, Coco had already completely defeated Mayoram's people. The topic of the first fight was soon announced, and everyone listened attentively to the young man's speech from the stage. He announced loudly that this year a New Year's speech should be written to the Emperor of Bacon, and that all participants would have to do it. The one who writes the best appeal will be the winner, who will receive a worthy reward and praise. And the theme of this tournament was indeed a festive essay that participants had to write. There was little time, so few didn't have time to complete the appeal correctly, but the content was basically the same. The essay praised the emperor's achievements and expressed loyalty, and it was a typical pledge of allegiance of a vassal state. However, one New Year's speech was different and received a lot of attention. This appeal belonged to the second prince of Levis Ortega, and its writing stood out among everyone. Participants noticed that the speech was both formal and witty, congratulating them on the prosperity of the empire and wishing for peace. In fact, Ortega was not a vassal, but an ally of Bacon, and it was also surprising that the second prince, who kept a low profile, spilled such thoughts. After the results were announced, a young man approached the prince and asked when Levis would invite them to the palace. Heirs of influential families, who do not belong to any faction, talented young aristocrats of the new generation, all those who hope for the independence of Bacon, Levis's New Year's message is engraved in their eyes and in their hearts. All participants of the tournament immensely liked the prince's New Year's speech, and they promised to transfer it to Bacon on his behalf. Participants tirelessly congratulated His Highness, considering his composition simply excellent. Christine didn't know why she wasn't the winner, and was very afraid that all the nobles whose trust she needed to gain had gone to the second prince. She had been tirelessly rewriting the appeal for the past 4 years, and she was sure that this text belonged to Julia Art. Julia was sure that this time Christine lost again, and each time she couldn't stand her defeat. Christine will have to accept that Julia will always come first, while trying to reach her invisible shadow. That evening, the prince was delighted to talk about the expression on Christine Mayoram's face when the results were announced, and he was crowned the winner. He had the pleasure of teaching a lesson to Mayoram's people, and the speech turned out great too, and in principle, received the attention of so many nobles. The prince admitted that he would like to reward Julia by providing her with a personal maid, but the girl refused, since as a commoner and as a person who had just entered the palace, she would feel uncomfortable. Instead, Julia asked for jewelry, and the prince didn't think the girl was interested in anything like that. Suddenly, Julia asked the second prince for a tiara decorated with snow-white pearls. After talking with the prince, the girl knocked on the door of Coco's room, and she really wanted her to be awake. Coco opened the doors and asked if it was time for everyone to go to bed, and Julia was still wandering around the estate. Julia held a box with a bow in her hands and told Coco that she had a gift for her as thanks for the help she had provided. Coco began to deny that she only helped so as not to damage the reputation of the young maid. Therefore, she doesn't need any gifts, and Julia only spent her savings in vain. But the next second, she saw that Julia was holding a gift over the fireplace fire, and said that if the lady didn't accept it, she would throw it away right now. Coco snatched the gift with a sharp movement and shouted, because there was no need to burn new things. In this case, Julia asked to open the gift, otherwise she would throw it in the trash. And only after that, Coco finally agreed to accept it. She opened the box with an excited face, worrying about what might be inside. But her excitement gave way to incredible joy when, on a black velvet pillow, she saw an incredibly dazzling beauty, a tiara with huge pearls. Julia noticed that Coco immediately began to look much happier and knew that this gift would delight her, because she herself told her in a past life. In fact, that day Coco told Julia to ask the prince for a tiara decorated with pearls, and then give it to her. The girl admitted that since the first meeting, she felt very sorry for Julia and wanted to help her somehow. If she is reborn and they become friends in the next life, Coco will consider her life undoubtedly a success. She really hoped that Julia would have the same strong, friendly feelings towards her, and believed that in the next life they could meet again. Julia could not answer the same way that day, but she felt the same emotions, both in the past and in her new life. And Julia was sure that even if she was only friends with Coco in her new life, she definitely wouldn't regret it. Coco got very excited and asked how Julia knew that she would particularly like this. But Julia just replied that the tiara looks very good on her. The Lord's ship arrived at the first southern fleet of Bacon, where strange events began to occur from that moment. On board, the ship were tied prisoners, and in front of them stood a young man who was about to give a speech. Kara stated that he had heard rumors that the young men had become errand boys for the most evil pirates. So from that moment on, he decided to divide everyone into categories. The useful ones would be saved, and the useless ones would become food for the fish off the southern coast. And from that moment on, the young men had to prove which of them was worthy of the title. The knights listened attentively to the master's conditions and loudly accepted his order. Karis was sure that they should be informed, because the fear of death always loosens the tongue. Babislav suggested that if Julia were here, she would have said many things, and even if she was right, there was no guarantee that the same thing would happen in the future. He was sure that, despite the Lord's words, he would still look at her after the mission, because she was his savior. At that moment, a knight approached and said that they had brought the senior captain, but the Lord ordered him to be thrown into the sea. They did this in front of all the pirates, and they just lost their top commander. They asked the young man to save him, saying that he often communicates with pirates, and that they know him well by sight. But the knight behind him argued that the connection between the fleet and pirates is a real crime. The Lord ordered to learn all the information, and at that moment, they informed him that a chest with gold coins had been found in the captain's office. The knight supposed that the fleet would probably insist that he had confiscated the gold from the pirates, but they lack proof that the commander of the southern fleet was colluding with the pirates. The Lord turned, looked at the land from which they were slowly moving away, and suggested the following option. He wondered if there was another way to find evidence that could help them. That night, Basil lay in his room, and thoughts about his recent conversation with Julia did not leave him. He repeated the conversation in his head, and could not understand why the girl began to behave completely differently. Basil wondered what happened to her, because she had always been very kind and flexible. But now everything was different. The young man noticed that Julia seemed to have become a different person and no longer dared to rule her. The young master refused to eat and shouted at anyone who tried to communicate with him or enter the room. The butler stood near the door and said, "His Excellency ordered to take care that the young man has lunch because he already skipped breakfast." He allowed the butler to enter and asked if he wanted to ask him a question. He asked if it was true that his father sent hyenas to kill Julia and they attacked her. The butler said that his father decided to get rid of the woman who worried his heart, and the hyenas failed. The butler admitted that he only wanted to know the truth and asked the man to tell him everything honestly. The butler did not remain silent for long and said that His Excellency ordered to disfigure Julia Art's face and return her head. Basil could not believe that he could do this to the woman he incredibly loves. The butler asked the young man to forget her, because of this woman he could easily ruin his life and denigrate his lineage. Logical. After these words, Basil slapped the butler hard so that he could no longer utter those words. Basil never liked the fact that everyone hated Julia for her commoner status. The butler said he really hopes that if Basil becomes the Marquis's successor, the time for playing with dolls will be over. And at that moment, the young man remembered Julia's words that he was simply stroking his pride, and he never loved her. The young man was sure that he loved the girl, and they both did not understand her feelings at all. So she asked him to tell his father that he would not marry Princess Shatrin. During breakfast, the prince admitted that, in his opinion, Basil Majorum is an immensely stupid person. After all, how could such a beautiful and intelligent Julia be allowed to escape from his tenacious hands? Coco asked Julia not to answer him under any circumstances, because his lordship only wants to vent his disappointment with Basil. The prince was indignant because, by saying this, he would appear in Julia's eyes as a completely different person. He saw a tiara on the girl's head and asked her where she got it from, because he gave it to Julia, and the girl stated that she gave it to her as a token of gratitude. By the way, Mayoram was supposed to arrive today, and this time he officially requested a visit to Julia. Last time, Julia had instructed him to come in accordance with etiquette and procedures, so he simply followed her words. He said he would come around noon, and that Julia should definitely take this into account. His Highness also had a guest today, and it was the same person they met at the tournament. Julia said they would be waiting nearby, but Coco wondered if they had a date with Basil. But Julia just smiled. It seemed to her that she was about to arrange something interesting again. She said that Basil would have to wait a little, and all this time, the young man languidly waited for the girl's visit. After a while, Julia approached the guest and confessed that Prince Levis had an appointment, and that's why he was late. The young man immediately said He told his father that under no circumstances would he marry the princess. And this was his final decision. But it turned out that the young man did not say this in person, and the lady thought that Basil would not cancel the marriage so as not to face strong pressure from the family. The young man took her hand and shouted. The lady said that he was her only love, but for some reason he kept rejecting her. He didn't see the ring gifted on her hand, and Julia said she threw it among the bushes. She asked the young man not to be angry. He will become the princess's husband anyway, and will obviously have better things. She asked him to come back and check that the butler had indeed delivered her message, and she smiled back at him. This meant only one thing. She again rejected the young master, who turned out to have nothing to look forward to anymore. After meeting with Basil, Julia realized how tired she was of useless confrontations. In the past, Basil never contradicted the Marquis's orders and did not betray his family. He just came up with all sorts of excuses to calm her down. But Basil in this life is a little different. Perhaps this was because Julia took the prince's hand in the imperial palace, or that something unknown influenced Basil. A maid approached Julia and told her that the girl's things had just arrived at the estate. The lady went out into the yard and saw a carriage near the gate, and next to it stood a man with a message. He respectfully greeted Lady Julia and told her that he had brought the dress she had ordered, and asked for permission to take it to the room. The young man warned that the girl would have to run into the store to pay. The girl asked him if she had understood correctly that the young man standing in front of her was named Maxwell. He asked the girl to sit in the carriage and told her that the master had been waiting for her for a long time. Lady Julia arrived at the specified location, and the young master was already waiting for her as an honored guest. Lord Carus greeted the young woman and told her that he was very happy to see her again. Julia did not think that Carus would come in person today, but she was also happy to see him. He opened the chest, and upon seeing the gold coins, Julia said, Carus was probably convinced that the Bacon sailors were collaborating with the pirates. The young man was going to give the girl gold coins because he needed cash to carry out his plans. The Lord honestly said that they investigated the case of the Bacon sailors, but they found no solid proof of their connection with the pirates. According to the evidence, the young man referred to the ledger, but the pirates. And sailors do not leave such dangerous evidence, and no one can find the book that Marquis Majorum is looking for. The girl said that it would be difficult to find an expense ledger, so it is better to try to find a charity book. And that should be enough. The young man wondered if this would serve as solid proof, but he immediately believed Julius's words. Carus asked Maxwell to take Julia to the castle, and he and others would go to stop the flagship. Maxwell asked the girl to follow him, and the lady politely said goodbye to Lord Carus. But before leaving, the lady decided to tell Lord Carus one more important thing. She said there is something else the emperor really wants, and only a small number of people know it. The young man was cautious because he did not understand at all what this girl meant by such words. The next day, Coco was busy choosing a dress for Julia and was sure that it had to be chosen carefully, because tomorrow was the ball in honor of the New Year celebration. Julia offered to try on a red dress, but Coco was already red-haired, and this dress did not suit her at all. At that moment, the voice of a young man was heard in the room, who was holding an emerald dress in his hands. The prince said that Coco bought this dress for the ball, and as he recalls, the designer left it for her. That girl claimed she hadn't bought this dress, and the prince smiled, saying it suited her perfectly. The prince smiled and said that this dress suits her incredibly well, and that Coco will have to try hard at the ball to look unsurpassed. Julia thanked the girl for the dress and told her that she couldn't go to the ball because only invited nobles could go. Coco sighed sadly and admitted that she bought this dress and not for the ball, and if Julia doesn't like it, she can wear it at least at night. Julia happily took her friend's gift, full of joy, because it was the first time she had seen such a beautiful dress, and she would remember this day forever. Coco was constantly dissatisfied with something and tried to downplay her gift, but she was very happy that Julia liked it. The prince smiled. First, Coco stole the tiara from the girl, and now she gives her a gift. The prince said that Basil and Princess Chatrin would attend this ball, and he was sure that the gala evening would be incredibly fun. Everyone was already aware of the breaking of Basil's engagement to Princess Chatrin, and this was clearly abnormal, because the agreement between the Majorum family and the imperial family was inviolable. Finally, the important day of the New Year's ball had arrived, and many aristocrats were already gathering in the royal palace. Christine Majorum approached the lady and told her that her son was in her class at the academy, and many heard that it was she who wrote the New Year's greeting for that contest. The lady thanked her for the compliments and enjoyed communicating with the society ladies who approached her with respect. Until last year, all the aristocrats always flocked to Basel. But after Christine graduated from the academy, everyone quickly joined her. Recently, the young man asked the butler if he had informed his father that he was breaking his engagement with the princess. The butler insisted that the gentleman needs to come to his senses, because this is a marriage with the imperial family, and he cannot simply make such an important decision due to his stubbornness. The young man was indignant. He really thought he had the right to say such a thing, but he tried to calm the heated young man so that his father would not find out. And it was tonight that the butler said that Christine wanted to become the first head of the family. Basil stood at the door, trying not to attract attention, and the first thing he saw was that Julia was also there. Suddenly, a red-haired girl approached him and said that she had been looking for a young man for a long time. This lady was the first princess of the empire named Chatrin, and she hadn't been able to find Basil for a long time. The young man knew very well that the princess would also come to the ball, but he tried by all means to hide from her. But even after seeing the angry lady, he still thought about where Julia had gone, whose eyes he had not taken off all this time. Chatrin's maids were indignant. The young man had completely lost his manners because the princess greeted him first, and he should at least bow his head, but he doesn't even answer her question. Chatrin tried to convince herself that the young man was simply nervous and, in fact, everything was completely fine. She approached Basil and offered to dance together, but the young man looked at her there as if seeing her for the first time. The girl extended her hand first, but Basil, to her great surprise, replied that he would rather dance with the other. He had just announced, in front of the secular nobility, that he had chosen another girl for the ball, and openly declared that he would never marry Princess Chatrin, and that from today, he should officially break the engagement. While all the aristocrats were enjoying the New Year's ball, Julia sat in her room and quietly read the newspaper in a comfortable soft armchair. But her privacy was violated by a couple who burst into her room, and both shouted that Basil had definitely gone crazy. Julia didn't immediately understand what they were saying, but when she heard Basil's name, everything became clear to her. Said the prince, the young man announced in front of all the nobility that he was officially breaking his engagement with the princess. And she definitely had to see this scene. The princess extended her hand, inviting him to dance, and the young man loudly declared in front of everyone that he was breaking the engagement, thus dealing a heavy blow to the princess's pride. The prince asked Coco if she really loved Julia, and she was sure that this was not about love here, only about a ridiculous obsession. He had the advantage over her due to his status, but now the situation has changed, and he cannot admit it, so he has recklessly become obsessed. That's why Coco tried to warn Julia to be careful with the young man, who supposedly had a broken heart. The royal family and the elders are like a two-headed snake. They cannot harm each other. But Basil violated an unwritten rule, and the king will feel extremely offended. And as a result, the marquis will be angry. Coco asked the girl not to leave the palace so she could keep her safe. Julia thanked Coco for her concern, but she was well aware that her life could soon end. After all, not even the imperial palace will guarantee her safety, no matter how much she dreams of it. The next day, the maid searched for Julia throughout the palace and finally found her walking calmly down the corridor. She said that the girl urgently needed to go out to the courtyard, but the lady did not understand why she needed to do this. The girl said that Princess Chatrin suddenly arrived, but that she herself had already found Lady Julia. The maid feared not having time to fulfill her mistress's order, and Chatrin asked if Lady Julia was the same girl. Julia bowed her head, as required by the greeting of a person of higher status than her. Lady Julia felt the blood rush to her face and tears sprang to her eyes, but determination burst within her. The next moment, the princess suddenly raised her hand and slapped Julia hard on the cheek. Silence reigned in the corridor, as if time had stopped, and the maids froze in shock, not believing what they were seeing. This shock was the beginning of an intense conflict that everyone present could witness. The princess shouted. Truly the girl dared to mock the royal family, but Julia assured that she did nothing of the sort. Chatrin insisted that Julia needed to kneel, but the lady said she could not do that. Julia said that she is His Highness's maid, that her honor also belongs to her, and that there is no need to ask for forgiveness. Chatrin was incredibly angry, and the maids who couldn't calm her down were very worried about how this might all end. Assuring the lady that the commoner would be punished by the prince himself, and that the princess should not interfere, Julia insisted that Basil Majorum was not worth getting the girl so angry and behave inappropriately. Julia knew she shouldn't say that, but the young man would still meet with her behind Chatrin's back, even after the wedding. And this man was incredibly vile, because he said that his marriage was only for his family. Chatrin did not expect to hear such speeches at all, because she was sure that Basil could not do such a thing. Julia stated that she would also be angry with him, but that she can do nothing because she is a mere commoner. And common, but Princess Chatrin can punish him. And she really hoped that Chatrin would not forgive this scoundrel and would have to put him in his place. Coco immediately learned about the whole situation, and Julia was indignant, probably not understanding that she was talking to the princess herself without any fear. It didn't seem funny to her, but with a huge bruise on her cheek, Julia looked incredibly brave. Coco shouted. Supposedly, Julia was completely crazy and really wanted to sow enmity between the royal family and the Majoramas. Julia thought about Coco's words, and something came to mind, so she found the best way to deal with the two-headed family. Suddenly, the girl shouted that she didn't want to marry from the beginning, and that all this was not her idea. King Ortega and his concubine tried to calm the angry daughter, convincing her otherwise. Her father always said that an arranged marriage is a royal duty, so all this time Chatrin tolerated his words. But now the incredible happened, and Basil trampled on her honor. She asked her father to force the Marquis and his son to kneel before her, and restore the reputation that she had exposed to ridicule. The father replied now, because Chatrin knows that this is not easy to do. And if this does not happen, the Marquis himself will soon sort everything out. The man assured that the Majorums were friends of the royal family and understood her feelings. But it would be better if the girls accepted it. But Chatrin, holding her hand to her chest, was indignant because her father is the king of this country, and she is his only daughter, and no one will allow her honor to be sullied. The father did not know what to do now, and the concubine insisted that she rest first. But Chatrin did not want to wait, but fiercely sought to understand the situation as quickly as possible. The next day the prince learned interesting news from his mother. Chatrin went to her father and heard that she asked Marquis Majoram and Basil to kneel before her. The young man was sure that this was impossible, if only because Basil lays claim to the throne. And Chatrin is incredibly vengeful. She admitted that she actually hated him too, but unlike her father, she was a good and honest person. In that second, the prince saw abrasions appearing on Julia's face that were not there before. He approached the girl and told her that he did not expect Julia to be able to hurt herself by meeting the princess. The prince was sure that she would be safe in his palace, but he was not powerful enough to take revenge on Chatrin. Julia smiled and replied that everything was fine, and that she had decided this from the day she decided to enter his palace. Surprisingly, it seems that as soon as Julia appeared in the palace, she already provoked about 3 turbulent events. The young man asked how long Julia would stay here, but she assured that as soon as the prince kicked her out, she would leave the estate. That very night, the gentleman had clearly drunk too much, and the maids accompanied him to his private bedroom. They dismissed the gentleman, and once all tasks were completed, Coco asked Julia to listen to her carefully. She said that they hate the Majorams, they are corrupting the kingdom since its founding. But that is not the only reason why she despises them. The queen is Majoram's man, and it was she who fenced off his majesty while the king was worried about not taking care of his highness, who was the daughter of a concubine. His highness's mother could not be there, and the young prince grew up alone, far from his family, without love and maternal care, so he always felt that he had no place in the palace. Julia asked why his highness had not left the palace, and according to what she said, because his mother was in the main palace. His Majesty Levis loves her very much, but they also hate his father very much, and the Majorams are probably to blame for everything. Coco asked what the lady was going to do if she made a mistake somewhere, because maybe this would not be enough. But Julia was just going to throw more wood on the fire to prevent that small spark from going out. Julia believed that perhaps Basil would be very reluctant to apologize to Princess Chatrin. Since he was cornered, Coco, with a twinkle in her eyes, said she was willing to trust Julia again, and that together, they would help light the fire by spreading the necessary information among the nobility. And these two girls wanted Mayoram to hear that Princess Chatrin hid an innocent girl in front of everyone. Niltain. Rumors spread quickly through the community, and the news that Chatrin had hit Julia as planned quickly spread among the people. It soon reached the ears of Basilius Majoram, and the only thing they said was that Princess Chatrin had slapped Julia on the cheek out of jealousy. The young man's father ordered him to definitely go to the palace and apologize to the princess, but Basil was in no way going to do this. The father did not understand what his son was doing, because he personally insulted the royal. And if the princess wants his apology on her knees, he should at least pretend. Basil did not want to lose his dignity, and as successor, Mayorama was sure that he should not bend the knee. The father told his son that if he wants to remain the successor, he should go calm Princess Chatrin's soul right now. He ordered the knights to put his son in a carriage and drop him off in front of the princess's palace so that he could fulfill his promise. Basil couldn't believe that his own father had just done this, but the man knew that he was only doing it for the good of his family. Princess Chatrin was enjoying the morning views from the window when she received news of a new guest. Mayoram came to her in person, and the girl was ready to hear a sincere apology, which is why he probably came to her. She considered the young man an incredibly scoundrel, but she would have to endure him even for her father's sake. Only if Basil Mayoram knelt down and asked for forgiveness, but to her surprise, the young man asked if the princess really hit Julia. The young man said he didn't know that Chatrin would use violence against someone who had done nothing wrong, because the girl should decide this with him. But the princess was indignant that the young man dared to trespass into her palace just to side with his lover and accuse her of jealousy. Basil considered what happened a real disaster, as the princess must be very angry, and the young man had no idea what to do correctly. The heated lady sorted things out, claiming that the young man belittled the royal family, and her in particular. The young man apologized again, but Chatrin flatly refused to accept his apologies and asked Mayoram to leave the palace forever. She believed that the young man and his pompous family should disappear from her sight forever and take responsibility for their actions. Immediately after meeting the princess, Basil went to see his father to tell him verbatim how everything had gone. The father was sure that the fault lies entirely with his son, as His Majesty the King ordered Princess Trez not to go out into the world anymore. This meant only one thing: his son deserved much harsher punishment than her. Christine will probably become Mayoram's successor, and in the end, this is what the father always wanted. He wanted to get rid of his useless son and choose the intelligent and beautiful Christine as his successor. But the man assured that Basil, even in such a situation, behaves like a truly stupid child. He was sure that he had spoiled his son when he was a child. That's why he dared to behave this way. Odig asked the butler to lock him in the dungeon so that he could not take a step without his permission. The young man wanted his father to simply remove him from the heirs. And why should he suffer a harsher punishment than the princess herself? Because he could simply be expelled. The father asked his son to come to his senses, and was sure that this happened because of that arrogant commoner. Basil stated that Julia was in the prince's palace, and that his father could not touch her. But his father considered himself the only one who could enter the palace. Things turned out better than Julia expected, and from now on Princess Chatrin is forbidden from going out into the world, and Basil was imprisoned in the dungeon of the Marquis's mansion. And now they will never be in a dark alliance, but Julia did not know how effective this could be. And probably everything happened because Basil is incredibly stupid. Now it's Christine's turn, and Basil's recognized position as successor will definitely be shaken. It will soon come to an end, due to the fear of losing his position and inferiority complex towards Kristen that he had accumulated his whole life, upon facing this fact in a dark basement. And cold, Coco approached Julia and told her. The maids told her that her friend wanted to talk about something. Coco seemed very worried and immediately realized that something was probably wrong. Julia said that soon the hyenas hired by Marquis Mayoram would break into the palace to kill her. Coco did not understand how this was possible, because no matter how strong the hyenas were, they could never penetrate the royal palace. It was truly impossible, because their target was not part of the royal family, and they thought that since they only had to kill a simple maid and disappear, it would not be a big problem. Marquis Muram always places spies near his enemies, and Julia wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to catch the rat that the Marquis planted in the prince's palace. Coco assumed that, Even if the girl was right, all palace workers were from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and she couldn't even guess which one of them was a spy. Julia offered to give them some money to finally learn all the necessary information. Julia opened a box of gold coins in front of the girl and said it was sent by her patron. Coco was surprised by what this young man was doing, as he could give the girl so much money. Julia still didn't know the staff here very well, but the girls knew one thing. They had to exclude someone and suspect someone. There was an incredible amount of gold coins in the box, and Julia asked Coco to help her. She claimed that with these coins, Coco can encourage the workers to work well and report the necessary information. The rain outside the window kept falling, and today the maids had a lot of work until late at night. Everyone was worried about whether the rain would stop in the morning, because they had to dig a ditch in the garden before. And Julia thought now is the time. She asked the domestic workers to provide snacks to the workers so they could eat during the break. But in fact, Julia was closely watching the maids, trying to find out which one of them was Mahoram's spy. On a rainy evening, Julia went to sleep in her room knowing they could attack her at any moment. Julia held a candle in her hands as she entered her bedroom and prepared to go to sleep. She carefully straightened the bed, as if suspecting nothing, and calmly prepared to lie down in a warm bed. And cozy. Julia's thoughts were occupied wondering when the thieves would come, and she felt that everything would happen very soon. She heard the silent creak of footsteps and slowly looked towards the door, finally expecting to see her thief. She firmly held the glass bottle in her hands and waited until the killer approached her. The girl felt the stranger slowly approaching her bed, and the next second she began to open the glass bottle and poured the liquid content over him. The killer looked at the girl with surprised eyes and was indignant because she had just dared to pour it on him. And it turned out to be ordinary oil. But Julia's plan was that if the young man was going to kill her, he would die himself, and the girl bravely brought forward lit candles. A spark fell onto the spilled oil, and instantly a flame erupted directly onto the body of the killer, who was about to commit a brutal murder attempt. The thief's hand began to burn, and the young man screamed from the burns, feeling intense pain. At that moment, the knights burst into the girl's bedroom, alarmed by loud screams. They saw Julia, who personally neutralized the enemy preparing to kill her that night. The lady asked the boys to help her put out the fire, because she needed a confession before the killer lost his life. The gentleman quickly ordered sandbags to be brought, and a careful check to see if there were other accomplices outside who might be allied with the killer. The thief had his hands tied. He sat in front of people who awaited his repentance, who ordered the girl to be killed. The killer did not want to answer anything. He only promised Julia that he would definitely die, because he never misses his target. Julia smiled and admitted that she was very aware of everything that was happening, and she knew how it could end. The second prince was immediately informed of the incident, and with cries of despair, he ran to the girl's bedroom, wanting to make sure everything was all right for her. The young man was indignant at how the hygiene dared to invade the royal palace, and he wondered what was going on here. Julia admitted that it was not his fault and asked the prince to calm down a bit. She said that the guard's duties include protecting His Highness the Prince, and the hyena tried to kill her, a common commoner. The problem was that the hyenas had a chance to enter the palace, and it was raining heavily, so the workers were constantly changing. Coco was sure that someone had clearly helped them from the inside, and maybe they were not bringing snacks to the workers, and they were talking in secret. Coco looked around the room with a serious look and wanted to know where Julia's room was, and what time she went to bed, what route they could take to enter without running into anyone. Next to the prince were maids who could clearly participate in this. So the prince looked closely at the girls and asked them to confess before locking them all up and subject them to severe torture. The maids were incredibly scared when they heard about the dungeon and in tears. They rushed to justify themselves before the young master. Julia asked the girls to try to remember if anyone looked suspicious, and Coco's plan seemed to work. In recent days, she instructed her trusted maids to closely monitor all suspicious individuals who did not go to bed by bedtime, that they were packing their things, and that they were ready to flee at any moment. Maids working together should know the criminal better than anyone, and Julia was sure that now they would have all the information. One of the girls decided to speak first and claimed that she did not participate in the attack. The prince asked to take her away and interrogate her along with the hyena, but the maid fell to her knees and begged for forgiveness. The guards grabbed the girl and the slave tried to say that she was not to blame for anything. But the prince did not want to listen to anyone. Everything was calm on the ship, until one of the young men decided to attack the gentleman in person. The enemy was defeated, and young Karas appeared before the man with his weapon. Expecting sincerity and truth from him, he told the young man that it was all over, but that he could give him credit. The man fought until the end. The man asserted, no matter how peaceful and loyal the young admiral is, he cannot tolerate disrespect towards the commander of the Southern Fleet, who was personally appointed by the emperor. The gentleman was trying to find out where the empire's honor had gone, and he did not want to be so kind and tell the criminal everything. He ordered him to be captured and taken back to the empire, and the others were immediately executed, because all the information had already been received. Babislav reported that they had completed the investigation with the Southern Fleet, and that the task assigned by the gentleman was completed at lightning speed. The young man understood that there was no point in denying it, and everything was resolved quickly only thanks to Lady Julia. The gentleman was incredibly happy that Julia was safe and sound, so he ordered the knights to return to see the lady as soon as possible. The prince stood near the window, beyond which stretched a burning sunset, and asked her to bring him food to his room. The maid Coco was very worried, because the prince was not eating well after the incident. The young man asked me to tell the girl not to worry, because lately he simply has no appetite. The prince was worried that he couldn't do absolutely anything, even when Julia almost died in his own palace. As a result, the hyena committed suicide without revealing the client. The maid knew nothing, and it was clearly Mayoram's doing, but nothing can be proven. The prince shouted that the invasion had begun and that security should be reinforced immediately. But the young man insisted that knights were needed to protect the royal family, and not to protect a mere servant. The prince couldn't believe what he was hearing, because he perfectly understood that Julia needed protection, and that the girl could be killed in the palace at any moment. He assumed it was just an excuse, and no one seemed to treat him like royalty. The prince remembered that his mother always cried in his memories, and was always very worried about everyone. The king loved her very much, but succumbed to Mayoram's pressure and chose another lady as queen. His mother remained unhappy for the rest of her life, and even her small son could not bring her joy. The prince did not want to glorify the king, who couldn't even protect the woman he loved, and he disliked everything related to him, so he was not interested in either position or power. But now he was willing to do anything to protect his people, who sincerely trust him. Standing near the window, the prince had the idea that he could no longer expose anyone to danger. He decided that he needed more power, and much more than he currently had, to be able to protect his loved ones in the future. The next day, Lady Julia had an important meeting, and the butler politely shook the girl's hand as she stepped out of the carriage onto the street. Julie looked around thoughtfully and assumed that the young man must be somewhere nearby. A second later, she heard a familiar and pleasant voice behind her, and in front of her was the gentleman, who was very happy to meet her. He admitted that he heard the girl was attacked, but he was very glad that she was completely fine, and nothing happened to her. Julia reported. Maxwell told her that the gentleman successfully completed the mission, along with his knights, and asked her if she was hurt. She was also very interested in how Babslav was doing, because she had developed friendly relations with this gentleman. The gentleman smiled and asked the girl to worry about herself first, because many strange events were happening in her life. Unexpectedly, the young man shook the girl's hand and asked her to go inside with him wherever he wanted to invite her. And Julia did not understand at all what might happen next. The gentleman smiled mysteriously and said that now is not the time for the girl to have painful doubts for so long. Their conversation continued, and Lady Julia and the gentleman enjoyed the communication and realized that such moments become real treasures in their lives. The girl, in response, shook the young master's hand and agreed to go with him wherever he wanted to invite her. They stopped at a cozy establishment. The young man asked if Julia needed more money. He could send her more, and thanks to her he became incredibly rich. He said that Marquise is collaborating with the Bacon Southern Fleet, and they are connected with pirates, and they transfer money to secret funds. Julia admitted that thanks to the capture of the Southern Fleet, this cash flow was interrupted, and people's lives could change for the better. And Mayoram's execution will gradually sink like a leaky ship that is sure to wreck. The gentleman was very happy. His mission helped not only him, but also the young woman to gain self-confidence. He was going to leave Ortega and return to Bacon, and that was why he met with Julia. The gentleman said confidently that if a girl wants something, she can definitely tell him, and he will try to do everything possible before leaving. The day after tomorrow, Julia will be able to go with him to the Empire, and the gentleman even offered to make her a noblewoman. The offer was incredibly tempting because the girl's status was quite low, and she was a common commoner. Before being consumed by revenge, if she had joined him in a past life, she could have lived as a normal person, but now it was too late for Julia to dream of something like that. She admitted that all her longings are in Ortega, and she will never leave her homeland. The young man asked if the girl was sure that this was her final answer, because she could achieve incredible success. Julia was surprised that the Lord really believed in her and was very happy to hear such kind words. The young man got up from the table and said that he believes in success and in girls, but that revenge does not necessarily require this. The gentleman, thoughtfully, replied that when he leaves this place, perhaps they will never meet again, because his homeland is far away. Julia perfectly understood the gentleman's feelings and also had a genuine interest in him. The gentleman thought she would express regret, given how close they were, but Julia remained inaccessible and knew for sure that she did not want to say it. At that moment, the gentleman Babislav entered, saw Lady Julia with feelings of joy, and began to hug his dear friend. He asked the girl not to leave after dinner, because the local innkeeper prepares incredible seafood dishes, and he would love to have dinner with the girl and the gentleman. Julia was worried. A commoner should not be here, but the gentleman convinced her, in any case. The commander will always take care of them, and they have something in common. The gentleman found the girl's laughter amusing, but did not understand how she could be happy, because a completely miserable life awaited her. And Karis clearly disliked this laughter, because Julia was like a firefly that hid for a short time on a summer night before dying forever. And these thoughts did not leave the young master since he first saw the girl, wanting to change life for the better. Upon hearing the news that all communication with the Bacon Southern Fleet had been cut off, Mayoram became furious. Butler reported that the commander-in-chief of the Southern Fleet was involved in a scandal, and he was sent back to the Empire. The man was sure, in any case, they should not let them know that they were in collusion, and he asked to stop all contacts with the pirates and secretly get rid of the vassal responsible for the trade. The butler said that a message about the tournament had arrived, and the man asked what the theme was. They say that whoever brings the king the best gift on his next birthday will win, and this is a good opportunity to improve relations with the royal family. The man was interested in the idea of the next opportunity to present the king himself with a gift that could help improve his reputation. This morning Julia was in the company of the prince and Coco, and she assumed that the real recipient of the gift was not His Majesty the King. No one had any idea who the real recipient was, so the prince wanted to find the answer to this question. In Julia's past life, the theme of the second tournament was always horseback riding, and it was organized for the princess, who was a great master in horseback riding. About to marry Basil, she became very sad, so the worried king forced the lady to participate in the tournament just to cheer her up. However, this time Chatrin was not only depressed, but even announced her breakup with Mayoram. So the reason for this tournament was different. Coco, after hearing Julia's speech, immediately realized that the theme of the next tournament was Princess Chatrin herself. That is, the gift should resemble the birthday of a king, but at the same time restore the honor of the princesses. Here one of two things could happen. Either bribe the king with something the princess likes, or make her an official proposal. Coco was sure that the proposal was definitely an excellent option to cheer up the princess, who had recently been abandoned by Basil. Julia asked not to worry so much. There is a gift that only Prince Levis can give, and can support the princess in front of His Majesty the King. The prince asked if Julia really wanted him to support Chatrin, but the lady was sure that. Above all, the princess now wants to trample on the Mayoram name, and they have the same goal. The prince, who incredibly hates authority and remains neutral, can unexpectedly retain the princess. And this sounds like pure madness. In such a situation, the heir has the open support of Marquis Majoram. But if Princess Chatrin appears, Prince Levis will support her. The young man was sure that Majoram's position would weaken along with that of the first prince. And Chatrin, of course, would like that. The prince asked if the girl became queen. The Marquis could launch an offensive, but Julia assured that this would never happen. And Levis believed every word of an incredibly kind and sincere girl who had already helped him more than once. He knew very well that Prince Levis would become king and that a bright future awaited him. And worthy, Julia argued that the prince should not exactly become king, but at least he could exercise his right to the throne. She admitted that if she were a marquise, she would have used the Levis prize for a prenuptial agreement. Because the prince is still incredibly young and handsome, and is an eligible bachelor for the empire, Julia said it was possible to offer the prince as the empress's or queen's husband. In fact, in a past life, Prince Levis was sold as a lover to Empress Bacon and died in a winter snowstorm in the Titania Mountains. Coco noticed that the prince's position is precarious now, but if a force arises to support him, the elders will not be able to treat Prince Levith carelessly. The young man had been studying the fundamentals of governance for 12 years and still understood something. But Julia offered to teach the young man, as it was not difficult for her, since she also studied at the Breuil Academy, and she was willing to share her knowledge. Life in the palace followed completely different rules, and to survive, it was necessary to take power here. Levis realized already in childhood that it would not be possible to live here peacefully without doing anything. The boy realized this as a child and was always afraid to face it. But then, to his great happiness, Julia Art appeared in his life, and from that moment everything changed for him. After receiving the Bry medal, she proposed a deal to the royal family and seduced Mayoram when she was a commoner. She shook up his quiet daily life and brought a new world in which there was room for joy and smiles. With the appearance of a stranger named Julia, the world really seemed to become kinder and brighter. And now she asks the prince to become heir to the throne and take on enormous responsibility for the lives of many people. The prince smiled and replied that he trusted Lady Julia very much and that he would try to follow her advice. The second day of the tournament began, and Julia decided that this time under no circumstances would she remain in the palace. The prince remembered that he was going to support the one who hit Julia, but he couldn't accept it. Julia sincerely and persistently assured that she believed in the prince and that everything would be fine. She remained on the street, and at that moment, Maxwell approached her informing her that the carriage was already waiting behind the palace. Julia said that Mayorama's mansion was carefully guarded by guards and asked if everything would be fine. The larger the territory, the more servants and the more likely vulnerable spots are found. So the young men took advantage of this opportunity. They gave the guard a couple of gold coins, and then the man quietly opened the door and asked the strangers to follow him. They descended the spiral staircase, lit by the dim light of the lanterns, and anxiously awaited their meeting. Basil had been locked in prison for a long time, and to his surprise, he finally heard someone's voices. He excitedly asked who was coming to him, because it wasn't dinner time yet. The visitors could not see him, but when he heard the girl's voice, he was completely speechless. To his great surprise, he saw Lady Julia in front of him, and at that moment, a smile formed on the young man's face, and his heart began to beat at an incredibly frantic pace. He prayed that he missed the girl terribly, and she hadn't visited him for a long time. Julia said that the young man was still incredibly selfish, and it seemed he was not going to think about other people's opinions. But Basil, clutching the iron bars of the dungeon, wondered what Julia was talking about, because he was sitting here undeservedly. But the lady believed that it was time for the young man to put himself in his place, from the first encounter to the last minutes. She didn't want his sympathy, but she wanted the young man to at least understand why he had changed from a kind girl and innocent to who she was now. The young man, in tears, rushed to beat the cell floor with his fists, shouting that he didn't know anything. Supposedly the girl studied quietly, as she wanted, lived comfortably, and only thanks to his and his family's support, she could achieve great heights. So the young man did not understand where the justice was here. He supposed that Julia probably wanted to use him, because if she stayed with him, he could enjoy the noble life she dreamed of. But the next second, the young master begged for forgiveness for his words, admitting that he was probably going crazy. Julia said that Princess Chatrin announced the breaking of relations with his family, that Basil would never be a marquis again, and the young man would have to accept this. Christine was supposed to take his place, and Basil would only bow to her all his life. And he couldn't believe this would actually happen. When the marriage with the princess was cancelled, the young man could be sold to another woman, and only then could he live like Mayoram. The young man prayed that it wouldn't matter if he didn't become a marquis, but he didn't want to live like a complete loser, because he was sure he hadn't done anything so terrible. Julia confirmed that the young man never tried, because in his whole life, he hadn't thought about having worthy benefits. Basil agreed with the girl's opinion and said that he needed to get him out of prison. After all, if the girl could get this far, it means she can open the door. And Basil indicated that he did not want to live as his father's tool, but wanted to find his own path, assuring that he would never appear before Julia again if she got him out. Julia asked him to come to his senses, because the young man would not live a single day if he left the mansion. He would immediately return home crying, but she really wanted to believe the young man. At the ceremonial meeting with the king was Prince Levis, who was supposed to present a gift to His Majesty in front of all secular society. People wondered why the young man arrived empty-handed and did not understand where the gift for His Majesty the king was. The young man presented himself as the second prince and stated that from today he would support Shatran Ordega as the official heir to the throne. The girl was very surprised to hear such words, because she could not expect the support of the second prince, with whom she had no friendly relations. Everyone was very surprised to hear the unexpected opinion of the second prince, and in silent bewilderment awaited what would happen next. The king asked if the prince was really sure of his opinion, because he wanted to know if he really thought so. The king admitted that he respects the decision of the young master, and that this is an ideal gift for him. Reconciliation for those who have been enemies their whole lives. Everyone congratulated Princess Chatrin, because thanks to this, she could be granted a happy future. And it seems Prince Pado's quiet life came to an end. Princess Chatrin's life began to shine with new colors, and she incredibly needed the support of the second prince. She saw Prince Levis and did not want to miss the opportunity to thank the young man for his unexpected support. Chatrin approached him and cheerfully told him that she did not expect the young man to do this, because she was sure that he hated her. And after these words, the prince admitted that he really did not like the princess. The lady said that now they would be on good terms, but that she alone could not receive such a gift. So she agreed to listen to the prince's request. And at that moment, the young man asked her to apologize to his maid, for whom he came to the palace, and slapped her. Chatrin understood that we were talking about the commoner, whom the prince cares for like a child. But she agreed to apologize, because she really went too far and the maid is not to blame for anything. She asked the maids to send him a gift, but the prince was indignant because he asked for a sincere apology. No surprises. Coco was sure that it was useless for the princess to say anything and only wanted the prince to change his mind right now. Chatrin thanked the young man and promised him that he would not be disappointed by his choice, and that he would remember his words. She was sure that Levis was probably just afraid of competition, but decided to act differently. Chatrin admitted that she is not what everyone thinks of her, and is ready to present herself to the people with a completely different image. This evening was incredibly joyful for Basil, because for the first time in a long time, he felt the smell of freedom. Julia asked to release the young man from prison, and upon crossing the threshold of the cell, he marveled that he could finally be free. Suddenly, the lady put a bag in front of the young man in which there was something, and asked him to take it, claiming that he would need it. Basil felt strange, as if Julia was showing kindness to some beggar, but he was sure that this bag would incredibly help him. Maxwell admitted that they could not simply leave him here, because tomorrow he might return, and tell how Julia helped him escape, but she was sure that she could always say no. Julia suddenly remembered how, in one of her past lives, Marquis Mayoram stopped funding, and the director of the orphanage mercilessly sold the children to a pirate ship. Then she cried a lot and tried to understand why Basil did not stop his father, because he had to help them. She kept insisting that Julia needs to think from the other side, and that, instead of living in a poor shelter, begging nobles for alms, it is better to become a sailor who does his own work. After these words, Julia's attitude towards Basil changed drastically, and she couldn't believe that she trusted such a vile and mean person. The sold children do not know that they are being treated like cattle, and the young man said this as if he were a spoiled noble. And Julie felt incredibly disgusted by his words. Now she was just curious to know what would happen if a noble wandered the streets at night with a bag of gold coins in his hand, and wanted the young man to finally learn a useful lesson. Instead of living within the walls of the marquis, it is high time for Basil to go out and carefully study the world. And even if he suffers, at least he can become a wonderful noble and change his opinion of people for the better. The young man ran quickly, holding the bag of gold coins tightly in his hands, and thought that after all, he did not intend to impose anything on her, and the girl's words were complete nonsense. As he ran, all this time he was thinking about Julia's words, that everyone has their own position, but he did not understand at all what she meant by this, and he did not realize how he fell to the floor with a bang, tripping over a stone. At that moment, Basil was spotted by some young men who were standing in the alley, and probably expected some noble to pass by. Basil did not notice that the young men were close, and decided at that moment to open the bag, because he noticed that it was too heavy. He saw a pile of gold coins and wondered why he needed money. But a group of young men had already seen that there was money in this bag that could be useful. As soon as Basil heard some conversations behind him, he realized that he had made a big mistake. Because he should not have opened a bag of gold coins in the slums, he decided that everything could still be fine. He just needed to rush to the city center and get to the Noble Club so that someone could help him. But the thieves were already approaching. Basil shouted that the thieves should let him go and not dare to touch him, because they could be punished. The men reached for the gold bag. At that moment, all the coins fell to the ground, and the thieves rushed to pick them up. The young man realized that they were really rude people in front of him, and decided that he needed to quickly run away from here before they remembered him. Picking up gold coins from the floor, the thief noticed that Basil was about to leave, and grabbing him by the shoulder, asked where he was going. He was brazenly surrounded by thieves, and Basil realized that it would be very difficult for him to escape from a group of robbers. The young men insisted. Nobles had very soft hair that could be cut and sold, and besides, a noble's clothes were incredibly expensive, so none of the thieves wanted to let go of such a catch. The young man argued that they could not treat a noble like this, but the thieves said that in this case, they could not let him go safe. In sound, the man placed his hand on the shoulder of the frightened Basil and told him that somewhere on the southern coast there are carnivorous fish, and that the young man probably does not want to become food for them. Prince Levis had a hard time in school and never thought that it would be difficult at this age. It was already midnight, and the prince prayed that the lady would take a break, but Coco insisted. Stop looking at the clock, and the ones who study poorly always look at them. Shortly after the prince befriended Princess Chatrin, she sent gifts to everyone, and Julia was sure that if she stopped her work right now, she could live off this money for the rest of her days. The prince really hoped to hear this sentence only if he was sold as a lover. Julia closed one of the textbooks and said that classes could be over for today, and admitted that she would like to tell him something. The Liberation Army distributed leaflets at the port, so total chaos began to reign inside the palace. The Liberation Army is a movement that dreams of Ortega's independence, because in reality, it is a vassal state of Bacon. The prince decided to boast of his knowledge and said that not long ago a demonstration had taken place, and that the commander of the Southern Fleet would soon be replaced. An admiral from Bacon was supposed to arrive if the Liberation Army reached the port and incite the people. This may reach the ears of the Bacon emperor, and then he will know that there are independence protesters in Ortega. In the conquest battle of the Bacon Empire, which conquered most of the continent, Ortega was the only country that kept its borders. Due to the fact that the current king knelt, he announced to everyone about the upcoming surrender. The emperor of Bacon, who had accepted the surrender before the battle, was content to keep the imperial fleet at sea, and such a lamentably achieved peace would certainly only weaken the strength of the Liberation Army. Julia suggested that the king would soon find out about everything, and the ministry said that this would be immediately reported to His Majesty, and the lady could understand what the king might do when he found out about this. The prince was very angry and said that the king would probably order them all killed, because that would be the easiest thing to do. In previous lives, the Liberation Army was always brutally executed, and the king thus set an example, wanting to show that he had no intention of fighting Bacon. Levis decided that he urgently needed to go to a meeting of nobles, and that it would be good to know their opinion on this matter. It was an excellent plan, but the prince had to be invisible, and at that moment, Julia cheerfully announced that she had a great idea. A large number of people from secular society gathered at the gala, and that night everyone was incredibly surprised. Gentlemen and ladies said they saw such beauty for the first time, considering the girl a rich foreigner who had come to relax in Ortega. Everyone tried to find out her name, and everyone present wondered what the name of the mysterious stranger was. A charming lady with pink hair and a purple dress appeared before them for the first time. And the name of this beautiful girl was Prince Levis Ortega. The lady in the bright violet dress immediately attracted a lot of attention because nobody knew who she was. But only a few people knew that the charming lady was the real second prince. She was accompanied by a beautiful girl who wondered where her mistress was going. Suddenly, Levi began to get very nervous because it seemed to him that someone would definitely recognize him, that she was not a girl, but a disguised prince, and tomorrow she might appear in all the newspaper headlines. Julia admitted that the prince was handsome and very talented, and that he should not feel so insecure. Julia was surprised how Levis managed to attract attention, as this is a very important skill for the royal family. While the young man lives as the second Prince Levis in the light, sometimes he needs to appear as the shadow of another personality and listen to revelations, and all this will be very useful to him. The young man was annoyed because strangers didn't open up to him so easily, and he was very worried about this. Anonymity always makes a person more honest, and it is better to hide the voice because it will be easier for people if a stranger cannot speak. Julia asked the prince not to try to look feminine so as not to attract too much attention. In the end, this is just a created image, and if you exaggerate, everything will seem unnatural. The prince understood that it was actually just an image, but he wanted to try to imitate the behavior of real women he knew. Coco was charming and confident, like a flame, and Julia was unshakable but restless, like a wave in a stormy sea. Levis was sure that he would surely manage everything, and that he definitely wouldn't be able to copy the behavior of the girls, but he always knew how to imitate. Julia and Coco were his teachers, friends, and loved ones, and he knew each of them very well. Therefore, the prince undoubtedly accepted the cross-dressing story, because it should really have strengthened his position. He needed high society in his face, and as long as he didn't bet too much money, he could enjoy the game at an amateur level. And since the prince tolerated alcohol well, there was no need to worry about being too intoxicated. Julia also gave advice if someone tries to discredit his personality. You just have to keep the person at a distance. His admirers, with whom the prince comes into contact in the person of the girl, they will definitely take care of his safety. It was also necessary to avoid vulgar gossip and disparaging jokes and focus on elevated dialogues instead of childish provocations. At the celebration, a young man approached the prince and asked for forgiveness, but clearly wanted to communicate with the unknown lady. Next to the prince was Julia, who decided that from now on she would initiate the first conversation with men so as not to put the prince in an awkward situation. The lady admitted that the lady did not speak directly because her throat hurt a lot. The young man said he just wanted to ask the mistress's name, and Julia had already thought of the pseudonym in advance. A mountain range, high and cut off, which blocked the south of the Bacon Empire 20 years ago, the border between winter and spring, named after the beautiful and cold fairy, and this incomparable stranger, whose name everyone wanted to know, was henceforth called Lady Titania. That same night, Coco was eager to know how everything went, and the prince told her he didn't find out anything because everyone just stared at him, and they didn't say a word about the Liberation Army. Julia smiled and replied, it was the first time the prince was in that company. He just needs to make as many friends as possible, and someday someone will invite him to the secret meeting. It really sounded simple, and the prince was still surprised that young people approached him as if they had fallen in love at first sight. Levis did not understand how one can love a person with whom you have never communicated and do not know his origin, and at that moment he began to think about what love really is. Julia looked thoughtfully down. She completely agreed with the opinion of the young prince, declaring that she never believed in love. After all fleeting emotions like bubbles disappear in an instant, and they are very difficult to capture, and nothing can prove or measure them yet, and each person can only feel and trust their heart. For some reason, at that moment the prince remembered his relationship with his mother, and how he often wished she would simply love him. When he was still a child, the prince understood that his mother stayed in the palace, even though she was treated like a royal concubine, and he really wanted them to leave there together. The lady assured that the baby would have to blame his terrible mother for everything, but she could never leave the king. After all, even if another woman became his queen, His Majesty said that he loved this lady more than anyone, and that he was sure that his love would be eternal. The prince did not understand why his mother said such words, because the king treated her inappropriately, and cruel. Since then, he had learned that there were people who believed that love lasts forever. And Julia admitted that she too had thought so once, and it seemed as if she had lived several lives. The prince laughed and finally understood why he didn't like Julia, because he and Coco were terribly pessimistic. But this was just a compliment, and the prince thought that if his head turned into a flower bed, that jelly would probably just pour cold water on him so that he would finally come to his senses. Levis asked the girls if they would be disappointed in him as a person if he said he wanted to run away. He admitted that he did not want to fight or kill anyone, and he was very afraid of becoming the same person he hated. But Julia assured him that a coward is someone who makes no decisions and just stands still. Any choice requires courage, and running away is just one of the protection options. So the prince has nowhere to run, because he himself asked the lady to fight. That day the prince was very thoughtful and suddenly asked if he would die in the end, or die at the hands of his father or brothers, and Majoram himself was likely involved in his death. And he was sure that, in this case, he would die unnaturally somewhere, and no one would ever find out. Coco did not want to hear the prince talk there, and tears welled up in the eyes of the most militant girl. One day an event will happen in Coco's life, and she will find out that Prince Levis will be dead. In her 8th life, Coco told Julia many stories and remembered her stupid and first love, and the one who bothered her terribly was actually an incredibly kind person. She even remembered the day she met a crying baby lying alone in a white crib. From that moment on, the prince became the most precious family member for Coco since their first meeting. And this meeting was truly special, because the lives of these two people depended heavily on each other. That is why, when the prince had already died, Coco cried for a long time, and it seemed as if she had truly lost a dear family member. Julia was sure that if given another life, she would do exactly the same, and now she would speak. Now Julia was next to her friend, and tightly held the hand of the man with whom she was going to live life together. She knew that even if destiny existed, and they were still destined for failure, she would not abandon her loved ones, and she will never allow any of them to disappear without a trace anywhere, nor let them stop believing in their dreams. And even if destiny separated them again, Julia believed that she and Coco would meet again, and they would be side by side, having gone through many trials hand in hand. The prince was indignant if the girls were really going to die with him, but Julia assured him that nothing was impossible for them, and she felt that Coco was definitely thinking the same, because for her, His Highness Levis is more valuable than anyone else. The prince heard such kind words about himself, and at that moment realized that he lived with wonderful people. He secretly said that he even felt free when he realized that no one would recognize him at that meeting. The girl asked the young man to follow the movements of the aristocrats and the Liberation Army, and always listen to what others say. The prince was going to the next meeting alone, as he was sure that he could not always count on Julia's help. And if you continue to shine your face, the prince might attract attention, which means that the person accompanying him must not be from the palace, and must be strong enough to protect the prince. And Maxwell could be perfect. Julia said she already had someone in mind, and promised to introduce everyone to the new hero tomorrow at dawn. Coco admitted that she had also planned to go to bed immediately after Julia left the prince's office. As soon as he and Coco were alone, the young man immediately asked what the lady thought about Miss Julia. He was still worried. He couldn't protect her from the scent hyenas, but Julia didn't run away, but declared that she would die with him. The prince admitted that this was incredibly strange, but if he were the girl, he would have run away, heels glittering and outraged at the stupid nobility. Coco hit the table with great indignation and shouted, Julia could never do that. She understood that Basil was just a young man who hadn't known first love, but Julia was a completely different person, and the prince was even frightened by such a strong reaction from the maid. Coco admitted that she loves Julia very much, but she doesn't want His Highness to get hurt, or that some trouble happens to them. The prince was worried. Lady Coco felt depressed, and he noticed it perfectly. Everyone knew that this girl named Julia was unlikely to be tough for anyone from secular society. The next morning, the carriage was waiting for Julia in the courtyard of the estate, and the maid wondered if the lady would leave without even having breakfast. She asked when the girl planned to return, and what to say if Lady Coco or His Highness asked about her. It was the first time Julia saw the face of this maid, and it turned out that her name was Trudy, and she was the maid recommended by the palace department. The lady understood that she was the one who came recommended by the department, which means the maid might be involved in something. Julia planned to return late in the afternoon and asked Coco to tell the prince that she was going for a walk. Not in vain, the girl experienced a strange feeling when she saw this maid, because she really had her own secrets. Some time later, Julia arrived in the city to meet and personally communicate with Sir Maxwell. After getting out of the carriage, she immediately felt that something was wrong, because the hyenas noticed her very soon. And probably, someone found out that she had left the palace. Julia was sure that the guard could be trusted, and very probably, the coachman himself didn't even know who she was. And now there is only one person left who saw her before the trip, and it was that strange maid. Julia perceived everything that did not happen as signs of destiny, which means that this time she will be able to find out that there is a rat in the palace. Perhaps this information would cost her her life, but Julia was determined to figure everything out, and no one could stand in her way. Behind the girl, there was really a young man who was pursuing her, and it was clear from him that he was not in the mood for friendly communication, but only wished to harm the girl. She saw his eyes and thought that he would definitely finish her off first and then commit suicide. The young man approached confidently, and Julia realized that, unfortunately, she could not do anything else, because he had already gotten too close, and it was unlikely that she could escape. The robber held a bottle fragment in his hands and quickly approached the girl, grabbing her by the shoulder. Lady Julia, leaving her fear behind, began to slowly step back, hoping to attract the attention of passers-by. And she couldn't believe that her life would end here, and now so absurdly. She knew perfectly well that everything would start over. Karis would save her again that winter afternoon, and she would fall asleep in the carriage again. But now it was better not to mention the curse, and the fact that she could never die. Suddenly, the girl felt that someone else had appeared next to her, and it was definitely not a robber. His powerful silhouette stood out against the sunset sky, and Karis instantly realized what was happening. The robber, stepping back scared, tried to escape, but Lord Karis did not give him the slightest chance. Karis, rubbing the hilt of his sword, just nodded, feeling that at that moment their destinies were intertwined forever. He asked if the girl was okay, but Julia just blinked in surprise and could not answer the young knight, who suddenly appeared in front of her like a bolt from the sky. The robber managed to escape, and the lord wanted to catch up, but Julia asked him to let him go, because he did not fulfill the order, and in any case, would be eliminated without his help. Karis was sure that the robber could return and try again, but now he needed to help the girl get up, so he carefully extended his hand. The girl admitted that she feels safe now, because the young master is by her side, and the young man is not crazy enough to risk it and come back. Karis was worried. The girl had almost died, and now she was sitting on the street and laughing, not caring at all about her safety. The young man was indignant. It is really possible that Julia is in a hurry to go to the other world, and she doesn't care at all whether she dies or not, and if everything starts again, this is not a reason to die. He admitted that he gets extremely angry when he sees a girl behaving so recklessly. It was a feeling Karis had never experienced in his life, even after dozens of encounters on the battlefield. Every time he saw her fragile smile, fragile like a crack in glass, it always seemed to him that she was about to break, and his heart seemed to be squeezed in his temples. Karis was sure that as long as there was an order, the hyenas would not stop, because the girl was a target for them, and she really wanted to spend her whole life running away, dying and being reborn again and again. Julia assured that getting rid of these hyenas is not that difficult, and there is an option to force the client to cancel the execution or kill all the hyenas. But now this was impossible, and after hearing the girl's confession, Karis asked to follow her so they could go to Maxwell together. He was very happy when the knight visited him with Julia, whom he was extremely happy to see. The young man said that Julia found him on the road and was attacked by a hyena in broad daylight in the very center of the city. The young men were sure that the girl urgently needed a good escort, but Julia insisted that she felt perfectly fine. The young man did not want to listen to Julia's excuses and told Max that it was an order, and that they needed to find all the hyenas in Ortega and kill everyone who was in any way connected with Mayoram. And only after they fulfill the conditions, Julia will definitely not die and never be reborn again. Karis considered Julia his savior, because thanks to her, he received valuable information about the Southern Fleet. And it was not excessive kindness or pity, so the girls shouldn't even discuss her opinion. Maxwell tried to calm the situation, noticing how the atmosphere between the two young people was getting quite tense. Julia said she came because she needed someone strong and reserved, but at the same time flexible, in order to communicate with the young aristocrats. Maxwell was asked to accompany a very important person, and Julia said it would be His Highness the Second Prince Levis in women's attire. It was already quite late, but fortunately Julia warned that she would be out all night. Karis once again recalled that he would take care of the hyenas, and that this would be the payment of his debt. But Julia insisted that the young man owed her absolutely nothing and was simply helping her. Karis smiled and replied that the lady herself knows everything perfectly and that he is not going to believe such nonsense. Julia soon prepared to leave, because today she had a lot to do and was incredibly tired. And Karis was indignant that the girl got up again and left like that. And despite his determination to be cold and reserved, the Lord felt that his life suddenly became meaningful. And it was all thanks to her. Come to think of it, Lady Julia has always been like this and never valued her life, as if it were a consumable item that could easily be discarded when it had served its purpose. He understood that these feelings for Lady Julia clearly went beyond simple admiration. And Lady Julia became a source of inspiration for him, a light in dark times. After talking with Julia, the young man remained on the balcony, and after a couple of minutes, a majestic eagle, which was His Majesty's bird, perched on his hand. There was a note tied to the bird's leg, and Karis began to read the contents of the letter with great surprise. That night, Charles burst into Maxwell's bedroom, and the young man began to be suspicious of what could be happening with such urgency. The young knight had a note in his hand that said he had just received a message from the emperor himself. Maxwell didn't have time to wake up, but he was already very interested in what the strange note was about. The letter said that, in the name of Quasino Everto Bacon, Emperor of Bacon, he appointed the second knight of the Empire Karis to a new post. He was appointed the new admiral of Ortega's southern fleet, a new rank Karis received for his services. Maxwell clutched his head, suggesting that His Majesty had clearly gone mad, and that it was another joke. The young man was sure that they were only loyal to him, Commander Karis, but not to the emperor, and he knew it very well. Therefore, Maxwell strongly recommended protesting, because the emperor clearly decided to return his loyalty in this way. Karis asked the assistant to tell him everything he had already found out about Julia Art, and this information interested him greatly now. Maxwell began frantically searching for some papers in his drawer, while Karis patiently waited on the side of his room. The young man, after a brief search, reported that the maid Julia Art grew up in the Eastern Port Orphanage. In Ortega, she arrived at the shelter when she was about 9 years old, but no one knows where she was before that time. From an early age, the girl was intelligent for her age, so she was quickly sent to work, since Julia was excellent at it. As a result, she was caught several times, but her file states that Julia stole. But there is no information about the stolen things. Subsequently, Julia attracted the attention of the Mayoram family, thanks to whom she entered studies at the prestigious academy. There she was friends with Christina Mayoram, and it was with this girl that she was incredibly close. Basil Mayoram, in turn, often gave gifts to the girl, and she was incredibly happy about his pleasant and warm communication. But because of this, Julia's peers bullied her, but at some point they got bored, and she paid attention to nothing but her studies. Now Karis has discovered the truth. Julia was a whipping toy, and was intimidated by many school-aged children. Julia lived a completely different life, because a commoner in noble society should feel incredibly lonely. But she, so fragile and brave, managed to survive. Moreover, Julia had never visited Bacon before, and presumably had never left Ortega. Nor had she been an informant for Marquis Mayoram. But now, Karis was not entirely clear where Julia had learned so much information about him. The emperor is truly an unpredictable man, and even those closest to him can never understand what he has in mind. But only Julia knew in advance what decision the emperor would make and could predict all his future actions. And if what she said about her 9 lives is true, then Karis should immediately find this girl again to tell her the whole truth. He asked Maxwell to look for more information, study her entire childhood if necessary, and they had to know absolutely every detail of the mysterious Julia's life. The young man asked which room Julia was staying in, planning to do something important concerning her. That night, Julia slept peacefully in her room, but suddenly while sleeping she started crying and worrying a lot. In her nightmares, she tried to scream, but the sound of her voice got stuck in her throat. And Lady Julia took a deep breath and tried to calm down. For the first time in a long time, the girl had a terrible nightmare. Her dark dreams still hung in the air like a shadow, not allowing her to forget that danger could lurk around any corner. She didn't immediately understand what kind of strange dream it was. And the girl had a clear feeling that a dear person had died in the dream. And suddenly, she heard the voice of a young man asking her if the girl was really tormented by nightmares. Lord Karis was near that night, and his presence always gave her strength. The lady asked why the young man was in her room, admitting that she does not suffer from nightmares, and any reality is much worse than any nightmare. Karis admitted that a thought still tormented him, so he came and wanted to share it with Julia. She suggested that Karis perhaps could not stand women crying and asked not to pay attention to them, claiming that they were just reflections and nothing more. But Karis was really very worried about Julia and could not ignore such behavior, because he felt that something was greatly troubling the lady. Julia asked, "It turns out the young man is not worried about her, and this time he didn't find anything to answer. He just sighed deeply." Julia was determined and really wanted to know if the Karises were really worried about her, in order to understand his true motives. In her 9 lives, Julia has learned something by trying to kill others. She always has to risk her own life. And this happens again and again. I try to take revenge. Julia risks everything every time, including her own life, and Karis saw that look again. He said that His Majesty, the Emperor, appointed the young man the new Admiral of the Southern Fleet, and that he would take care of the sins of Majorum Moa. And Julia knew in advance that she would not return to the Empire. He asked if Julia would like to live freely and forget about all the troubles, because she could go to Bacon and he would take care of the hyenas. The young man carefully invited the girl to give her everything and fulfill any wish. But Julia looked thoughtfully into the void. She admitted that if the lady could not yet give up the idea of revenge, she could simply take his hand and be sure that everything would be fine. And as long as Karis and Julia serve the same goal, they should become the most loyal friends and provide each other with the support they so desperately need. Carlos instructed that if Julia is with him, from now on he can protect her, but in return she cannot simply die. And her life is incredibly valuable, like the life of any person. Julia was so eager to hear those words that they needed her, and she wanted him to be the first to approach. She confidently took the young master's palm and promised from that moment on to do everything for him and try to be there at the most necessary moment. A luxury carriage stopped near Julia, and the lady told the coachman that she would like to go to the palace square. Suddenly, an unknown young man ran up to the girl and announced that he was also going with her, but she was sure that it was not necessary. Karis gave the coachman some gold coins to deliver everyone safe. In sound, Julia was very happy that Karis insisted and went with her, because this speaks of his special attitude. The girl wanted to say something, but it was in that second that Karis also started saying something, and both stopped talking in an awkward silence. The lady agreed to start first, and now she was very clear what it meant to understand each other without words or gestures. In recent days, she had increasingly occupied Karis's mind, and her image haunted him even when he tried to focus on business. What many might perceive as weakness, she turned into strength, and only in her eyes did he see depth and intelligence. She was not only beautiful and intelligent. From the first minutes, Julia awakened in him the desire to protect her, support her, and make her happy. He considered Julia a rather strange and problematic woman, but now she has become the one he absolutely needs. Perhaps it was the first time in her 9 lives that Julia took the extended hand, and it seemed as if they had seen each other for the first time since that first encounter in the snowstorm in the mountains. The carriage arrived at the palace square. The young man, with special care, gave his hand to Lady Julia, helping her out of the carriage. Karis suddenly felt that these feelings were not just a passing hobby. He understood that they had become an important part of his life, and that her happiness was his goal. Hand in hand, they headed to the palace, and finally Julia felt completely safe. After a couple of minutes, the girl admitted that Mr. Karis could probably let go of her hand, because probably nothing would happen. Suddenly, an unknown young man ran past the girl and accidentally touched her shoulder with his hand. Karis's reaction was incredibly fast, and the lady didn't even have time to understand how he tightly grabbed her by the shoulder. The young man excitedly asked the girl to walk by his side, because no one knows where the hyenas might attack next time. Julia felt that Karis turned out to be incredibly caring, and she began to think that, indeed, all this time he had treated her with special understanding. They approached the palace gates, and the lady thanked the young master for taking the time and choosing to see them off with complete safety. Lady Julia was special, and he was willing to do anything to prove it to the girl. They slowly let go of their hands, and Karis warned in a soft voice that he and Julia would see each other more often now. The sun played with her hair, creating an aura that drew his gaze, and at that moment he realized that he did not want to let her go anywhere, not even one step. All this time, someone was watching Julia from afar, and today the prince could not believe that the lady had just taken a man's hand. He ordered the knights to return, and the guards did not understand at all why their master suddenly started behaving this way. After all, they came here especially so that Prince Lavis would especially see Miss Julia and have a nice time. But after what he saw, Lavis realized that this was no longer necessary, and with a sad look, he asked the knights to simply return to the estate. Coco woke up as usual around noon and stretched sweetly in her cozy bed. The maids went to the head maid's bedroom and wished the girl a good day. Because she had just woken up, they reported that the count had just requested her visit, and the lady wondered why her father needed an unexpected meeting. And urgent, the maids laughed together and said that today was Miss Coco's birthday, and that she had completely forgot about her holiday. They said that Julia returned this morning, and everyone thought that Prince Levis would receive her. But to the surprise of the courtiers, she returned completely alone. But Julia managed to hand the maid a nice pink box and asked to deliver it urgently to Lady Coco. The maid gave the girl a gift box and suggested that perhaps that was the real gift for her birthday. Coco was sure how Julia knew when her birthday was, since she had never told her. Not only was Coco incredibly interested in what was in the box, but the girl asked the maids not to rush her to unwrap the gift, because she was already nervous. Carefully opening the gift box, Coco saw an incredibly beautiful hairpin with blue forget-me-nots and huge pearls inside. The lady insisted. Julia couldn't know about her birthday, and obviously someone close to her told her. But definitely not the prince, because every year he forgets her birthday. In any case, the hairpin was incredibly beautiful and looked expensive, and the maids wondered where Miss Julia got so much money. Coco asked the maids not to meddle in other people's business, but to return to work, but the girls smiled and said that Coco was probably just jealous. They both knew that this day was not just a holiday. It was the continuation of their strong friendship. The tiara that Julia gave her friend last time had pearls, and this hairpin also had large beads, which Coco likes very much. And even this time, Julia somehow managed to guess her preferences. At first, Coco considered Julia a rude commoner, but after a while she saw in her a strong woman. And intelligent. Every time Coco sees her, she has a strange and completely unfamiliar feeling. And these feelings are very strong. Come to think of it, even their first meeting was completely unusual, and a commoner would have found it strange that she defended him. But Julia didn't even attach any importance to it. Coco realized that this only means that they have known each other for a long time. And that is why Julia knows all her friends' preferences. It was strange, but it was at that moment that Lady Julia clearly felt that Coco had finally received an unexpected gift from her. They and the maid were in the room and made a festive bouquet to give to Coco. Suddenly, Coco approached the girl and persistently asked Lady Julia never to lie to her so brazenly so as not to lose trust. After all, she had absolutely no way of knowing that today was the maid's birthday, and no one could provide her with this information. Julia only pretended not to understand what they were talking about, and Coco was indignant. The girl really wanted to say that she didn't give that very special gift. Julia admitted that she bought it simply because the hairpin would look incredible in Coco's fiery hair, and she is grateful to her for helping her adapt to the palace. Coco was hard to fool, and the lady immediately realized that Julia had just uttered a painfully long sentence and admitted that she hated being indebted to anyone. Julia asked the maid to leave them with Coco because she wanted their conversation to remain private. The girls were left alone, and Coco was surprised that Julia even asked the maid to leave the room. And clearly, there was something interesting here. The lady finally admitted that there is a spy in the prince's palace, and this girl named Trudy, who works as a new maid. Julia said that yesterday she was attacked by a hyena as soon as she went out onto the street, and of all the people who knew about her going out, only she is suspected, but the lady chose a random carriage, and she was also provided with security. But still, someone immediately reported that Julia had left the estate. And if they realize they have been exposed, they can simply send someone more discreet and still try to kill Julia. Coco was sure that they could not simply leak information, and by asking, she meant something completely different. Julia asked the faithful and devoted Coco to name Trudy as her personal maid, so she could fix everything quickly. After talking with her friend, Coco looked for a new maid and asked her to keep in mind that talking about Julia's personality in this palace is completely inappropriate. She named her personal maid and asked her to remember that Julia was chosen by the venerable second prince, and that from now on she must serve her faithfully. Coco immediately noticed that the new maid was quite intelligent, had a good reputation, and she was also friendly and dedicated to her work. And she would never have thought that this girl was a spy. But if everything is as Julia says, you need to know it as soon as possible. The new maid entered Julia's room with Coco, and everyone was clear that this girl had been planning something for a long time. The girl was happy. She finally managed to reach Julia Art, because all this time she had been skillfully fighting the hyenas. As if she knew she would be completely attacked, the lady asked the new maid to sit on a chair to ask her in more detail, supposedly about her hobbies and previous jobs, but it was very surprising to her that there was only one chair in the room, and they asked the girl to go and sit down. The lady seemed to feel that her lie would soon be revealed, but she was sure that this could not happen under any circumstances. The maid got very excited and asked if she had done something wrong, because next to her were two girls who wanted to know something. Coco laughed mischievously and said, "The girl acts well, and such a performance can be staged in the local theater." The maid was perplexed as to what Coco meant, and confidently continued to pretend that she didn't understand anything at all. Julia decided not to torment the young woman and told her, as you know, that she was personally sent by the management of the royal office. And the maid contacted the hyena and told her everything about Julia. As soon as she left the castle, the maid trembled violently and continued to say that she really didn't understand what she was talking about. The girl claimed that she was born in a village and knows no one in the city, and where she would have connections with such important people. Of course, the spy must have an impeccable past, and the hyena that the girl sent after Julia yesterday is probably already dead, having failed the mission, and because of that, of course, she must be executed. The spy perfectly understood that the same awaited her, and her plan and her accomplices had been revealed a long time ago. Julia felt the tension dissipate, and this meeting could be the beginning of their cooperation to solve the mystery threatening the palace. She asked Trudy to think carefully from now on, because it was not in vain that they sent her here, and she should probably stick with those people who will help her survive here. And only now did Trudy finally realize the desperate situation she was in. But it is unlikely that the maids will now have another chance to correct their mistakes. The snow, shining under the faint winter sunlight, it covered the ground like a soft, snow-white carpet, hiding all traces and uncertainties. Two paths stretched around the girl, and she stopped near a sign on the snow-covered road.